Hello, everybody. We're live, ready to roll with another call-in live stream show. How is everyone doing this Friday? We are in the middle of May. Summer is right around the corner. Over here, it's plus 30 degrees, Alexander. How are things in London?
Nothing like that warm. But I mean, and we've had some rather, more cloudy days, which is typical of London. But it's fine. The weather's good. It's pleasant. I've just walked my dogs. They've had a wonderful time. So it's not 30 degrees, but it's pleasant enough.
All right. Hello, Spartan Warrior Queen moderating. How are you doing today? Always great to have Spartan Warrior Queen in the house. Hello to everybody that is joining us wherever you are in the world. I saw Chicago in the house. I saw Sweden in the house. I saw Serbia in the house, and a lot of other countries hopefully will be joining us for this live stream, which focuses on foreign policy of the Biden-Harris administration. I don't know if people saw the video that went viral of Kamala walking the red carpet way back many years ago with Montel Williams, the talk show host, when she was dating him. Anyway, it's gone kind of viral. Interesting little video. We will add the Discord link to the live stream real soon, and we will also, about maybe 15-20 minutes, we'll also put the call-in show link. I'm going to pass it off to you, Alexander, very quick. Guys, check us out on Locals. Check us out on SuperU, which is a new free speech platform. Of course, Odysee, which is the blockchain video platform. BitChute, Rumble. We're kind of everywhere, or we're trying to be everywhere, but we're posting as many things as we can to as many platforms as we can, and we're also doing exclusive videos on those platforms as well, i.e. videos that are not going to go on YouTube because we may be talking about sensitive topics, at least sensitive for the YouTube guys. So Alexander,
I would stress very legitimate and proper videos, but some videos that some people seem to find difficult, and that creates problems. So that's why we do it. But they're perfectly good, valid videos on real issues. So where are we? We are in a situation. Go on.
Real quick, Alexander, let me just say a couple of things. Hit that like, everybody. Make sure you hit that like so this video can be found. And what else? The Duran shop, 10% off all merch. Use the code REALNEWS. Alexander, Biden in the basement. Go ahead. Biden in the basement. Very much like the way he ran his campaign in 2022. He's gone from running a campaign in the basement to running a foreign policy in the basement, hidden away.
Well, you're absolutely right, because in fact, one of the most remarkable things, this is an extraordinary experiment, because in effect, the United States at the moment doesn't seem to have a foreign policy. It's functioning on automatic pilot, as far as I can see, because think about it, there has been actually no significant initiative since the administration took office, except one. That initiative was to ask Vladimir Putin for a summit meeting, and they got no agenda for that summit meeting. The Russians are now coming up and are saying that openly. There's been a statement to that effect from Lavrov, but everything else seems to be reactive. So there's a situation in the Middle East. They're trying to react to that, only they're not giving it very much attention. They're coming up with very muddled and chaotic responses to what happened in what's happening in the East, in the Far East with China. They don't really seem to have a plan for that either. And with Iran, they're trying to negotiate the JCPOA back, but they don't seem to be able to get their act together with that. And in Europe, as we saw, all they can really offer is a summit meeting with Putin, because, and I think this is perhaps the key to the problem, I think they did have a plan at the beginning. I think that plan was to try and push the Russians in Ukraine. There's going to be some kind of a threat, or perhaps even a war in Ukraine. They didn't expect the Russians to react in the way they did. They didn't expect the Russians to squelch that attempted coup in Belarus either. And with the failure of all those attempts in Europe, they have no policy and no strategy left either. So you get this extraordinary impression of an administration that is on automatic pilot. It doesn't know how to respond. It's firefighting in one or two places, but even there, it's not doing it with any conviction. And the result is drift on every front. An attempt to set up a summit meeting with Putin without an agenda, no plan for the Middle East, no plan for the Far East, no real plan for Europe.
Yeah, we've got from tensions in Ukraine, now we've gone to the Middle East, which is just on fire. It seems it's getting worse by the day. It's not a good sign as we head into the summer. Something big is happening, something bad, I feel. My gut is telling me something bad is right around the corner. My question to you, Alexander, before we get into some calls, and I would like you to try to dig into this a little bit. I'm not sure if the U.S. being adrift or disappearing, I struggle with this. Is the U.S. exiting the foreign policy stage? Is this a good thing? Well, that's my first question. My second question is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is this kind of a wash? I mean, is it neither good nor bad? And does it worry you that this type of vacuum in the White House in Washington, D.C. is going to get filled by neocons and military industrial complex stooges and these types of people? In other words, they'll see the vacuum in DC with regards to foreign policy, and they're going to kind of take over the decision-making process there. And then we're going to be in a world of hurt if that does happen.
Absolutely. Can I just say it is an unequivocally bad thing that there is a vacuum of decision making and that everything is in drift. I mean, if you have a policy of disengagement, a real policy of disengagement, that is one thing. That is a policy. You work to implement it. You do various things to carry that through. You talk to the right people. You take steps in place. You sort it out. But for a country like the United States to work on automatic pilot means that things are going to accumulate and go wrong in all sorts of places, with everybody around the world wondering what Washington is up to, and everybody maneuvering frantically for position as they sense that the superpower that has dominated world affairs for so long is not really engaged any longer. So it is an entirely bad thing, and it is going to create more conflict. And when you say bad things are coming in the Middle East, you are absolutely right. And the Middle East is the place really to watch and to be worried about. And when you also say that where there is a vacuum of power at the center, that will be filled ultimately, and that could very well be filled by the hardest and toughest and most aggressive people. That is true also. Politics abhors a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. If there is a vacuum in the Middle East, we will not see things improve. We will see them get far worse, at least in the short and medium term. And that is going to trigger a reaction in Washington, which in turn is going to lead to bad things as well. So this is unequivocally a bad thing. It is one that fills me with concern.
Okay, let's take it one by one. Ukraine, do you think that crisis has now been averted? In other words, are you worried about anything happening up in Ukraine as we enter the summer, or maybe in the next 6 months to a year going forward, outside of the shakedown that Blinken and Nuland did the other day on Zelensky? What do you see as far as Ukraine is concerned?
No, it has not been averted at all. It's just been left hanging. I mean, Zelensky was induced to send his troops to eastern Ukraine. I mean, no question about it. I mean, he was encouraged to do this, and he's now being left hanging, and he's flapping in the wind. And in a country like Ukraine, that's going to create enormous problems. A proper policy would have been, first of all, to tell him under no never not to encourage him to send those troops into eastern Ukraine, which is what happened. And if they've made a decision now to pull back from Ukraine, they should straightforwardly say so. And they should work with the Russians to come up with some kind of compromise. When I say compromise, some kind of arrangements for Ukraine to stop the whole situation getting out of control. Leaving it in limbo in the way that they've done is going to invite terrible problems. It's going to make some of those people that exist in Ukraine, the ultra hardliners, extremely nervous and extremely angry, and they're going to be pushing for war because that's all they really know, because they're afraid that their project which is collapsing, and that's going to make Zelensky very nervous. And we already see that he's rounding up his opponents and charging with them with high treason. What it does is it leaves a fire keg. It just means the fire, or all the fuel for the fire is there. The only thing that happened this spring is that they didn't light the match, but the fire, all that fuel is still there, waiting to explode at any time. So that's Ukraine. I think it's important to stress the fact that we didn't get a war this spring doesn't mean that a war isn't going to happen. I didn't think there would be a war this spring, but that doesn't mean that I don't think there will be a war at all. On the contrary, leaving things adrift all but guarantees it.
Okay, so the thing about Ukraine that I think may be a problem is that you had Blinken and Nuland. They arrived in Kiev. They spoke to Zelensky. They had a list of demands. Basically, we've done a video on this and it'll go up over the weekend. But basically, it was a list of things for Zelensky to do and a shakedown. And it was a shakedown telling Zelensky, look, we want you to do A, B, C, and D. And we're also going to come in here. In other words, when they're saying we, government officials, oligarchs, U.S. business people, all of the carpetbaggers, we're all going to come into Ukraine and we're just going to pretty much buy up everything and pillage the place. I mean, I'm paraphrasing it, and you may want to get into the details of it, but that is essentially what happened when Nuland and Blinken rolled into Kiev. What worries me is that once they're done pillaging the country, then they're just going to let the place melt down.
Absolutely.
Just disintegrate.
Well, absolutely. That's exactly what they're going to do. I mean, obviously, we haven't had the formal transcripts of the private discussions, but the leaks now that are pouring out of Ukraine tell a terrible story. It sounds to me, and we said this on that program that we've just done, which our viewers should watch. There was exactly a repeat of late Yeltsin Russia. All of these people coming along, the Americans coming along, they talk about the need for you to carry out reforms. And what they mean by that is put our people in charge of your economy, open up your businesses, let Americans take them over, and let all the money pour out of Ukraine into American pockets. I mean, that's what that amounts to. That is what happened in late 90s Russia. And it's exactly what we're seeing happening again. Now, you can't do that in a place like Ukraine without consequences. In Russia, there were consequences too, but Russia is a much more institutional place. I mean, there were powerful institutions which ultimately brought the whole thing back under control. Ukraine isn't like that. If you start behaving like that in Ukraine, you will trigger responses which, given the kind of feelings some people in Ukraine have towards Russia and the extent to which they have become committed in all kinds of policies and have been implicated in all sorts of actions in Odessa, in the eastern Ukrainian regions, in Kiev and elsewhere, you have all of these people becoming increasingly angry, increasingly alarmed, increasingly frightened, and that could very well cause them to start something disastrous in the east as they sense that Ukraine itself and the entire project of Ukrainianization they embarked upon is falling to pieces around them. It's a very reckless, selfish, misguided policy that is now being forced on the Ukrainians.
Yeah, but a lot of people are going to roll in there and make a lot of money from the place. It's a complete tragedy, Yes. Let's move on real quick before we move on. Valley S with the $20 super chat. Thank you very much, Valley S. It's an honor to be part of the Duran family. Here's to your best year ever. Thank you very much, Valley S, opening up the show with the $20 super chat. Alexander, let's move on now to China, the Pacific, South China Sea. We had a lot of tension there as well. We have a lot of tension there, especially between China and Australia. We did a show on China and Australia. We did a show on China, Australia, and New Zealand as well, in the Five Eyes. This is another hotspot. China, the Pacific. What do you see there?
Well, what has happened, and it's become incredibly clear, is again that the United States has no real policy with respect to China. It's made some brave words. It's talked about China being the great challenge, the big adversary, and the fact that it hasn't actually translated into anything positive has done two things. It's made the Chinese realize that the United States thinks of them as an adversary, and it's also made the Chinese see the United States as weak. So you have a combination of the two. And if you go to the Chinese media now, they are full of confidence. I mean, to an extent that I've never known before any American adversary to be. They feel that they're on the move in the Pacific and that they're going to roll it all up. And they feel that there is nothing that the United States is going to do to stop them. So instead of slowing the growth of Chinese power, or alternatively coming to some kind of arrangement with the Chinese in which, you know, we set out clearly what our red lines are, we recognize what your red lines are, we come to some kind of structured compromise, which the Chinese would be, I think, have been perfectly willing to work towards. They're realistic people. What you have done instead is you provoke them, and at the same time, you've exposed your own weakness to them. With a country like China, that is a reckless thing to do.
What about Australia and New Zealand and their connection being part, not even connection, being a part of the Five Eyes, but their trade connections and their previous business that they had, their investment with China, and the fact that Australia is moving in one direction with China, but New Zealand has taken a different approach?
Well, what's been happening is that Australia has been left again twisting in the wind, because the Chinese have acted very forcefully against Australia, because Australia took all of those steps. And again, if you go to the Chinese media, they are utterly uncompromising about Australia. But there's been very little in the way of support for Australia from the United States. You've not had Blinken going there. You've not had Austin going there. You've not obviously had Biden or Harris going there. You've not had, invitations to the Australian Prime Minister to come to Washington. You have nothing like that. You have no real interest in Washington, in what is happening in Australia. By the way, it's not just Australia, Philippines also. I mean, the Philippines are facing all sorts of pressures from China at the moment. There's all these fishing fleets, which are Chinese fishing fleets, which are maneuvering around. And again, the Philippines, which is divided anyway about China. I mean, there are people in the Philippines who say to themselves, well, maybe, we're not really, we should be friends with China, not adversaries with China. Again, they feel, I think, to a great extent, left hanging in the wind. And other countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and indeed New Zealand, are drawing their own conclusions. And we learned from Gareth Porter that US officials have been trying to go to Vietnam, for example, to try to persuade Vietnam to align more strongly with the US against China. Vietnam and China have a complicated history, and the Vietnamese have basically shown them the door. They said, we're not interested. And New Zealand, which is one of the core allies of the US, one of the Five Eyes, well, they're actually distancing themselves from this policy, because they see what happens to Australia. They see it gets hurt because China reacts, and they see that it doesn't get much support from the United States. And they're saying to themselves, well, we're not going to go there. We're not going to put ourselves out and face up to China in that kind of way and lose business and lose, damage our economy, because when ultimately we don't feel that we have confidence in the US at our back.
Yeah, a lot of tension brewing between Philippines and China.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of rhetoric going back and forth there as well. Yeah. Let's go to the Middle East. The Middle East now, the big one. This one is just wow. The last couple of weeks, it's really escalated to a point where I don't think it's going to go back at this point in time. There were reports yesterday that that Israel was preparing for a ground invasion, a ground troop invasion, but they've since walked those back a little bit. They've dialed it back a little bit. So What do you see happening in the Middle East, Alexander? Once again, you have a Biden White House, which is, it seems, MIA at this point.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. And I wasn't, you know, we did a program about this and done a follow-up program on my own channel about it. And by the way, we're not the only people to comment upon the fact that the US has gone MIA. There was a very interesting article in the Daily Telegraph making exactly the same point, that, you know, where is the United States in all of this? And I went through all the various statements that US officials, Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, have been making about the situation in the Middle East. And it is all waffle. I mean, they don't come up with anything, any ideas at all about how to address this problem. And they don't even seem to show a great deal of urgency about this, even as the situation is deteriorating almost by the hour. And then I did what I often do. I looked at what other countries are saying and doing, and the obvious one at this time is Russia. And I learned from the Kremlin's website that Putin spoke to Erdogan, talked again about the importance of a comprehensive peace, talked about the two-state solution, talked about international law, and the Russian Foreign Ministry says that the Russians are working with the Jordanians to set up direct negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis in order to try to bring this thing to an end. Now, that may all be pie in the sky. It may be that isn't going to work, but that is a policy. That is some attempt to do something about this situation. If you go to the United States, which has immeasurably more cards to play, you get nothing at all. You get no real indication of what the United States is actually going to do in this kind of situation. All they're saying is, we want things to calm down, and that's it. They have no serious proposals, no ideas, no fresh proposals to bring to the table. Every previous administration that I can think of, going all the way back to Richard Nixon's, has come up with some kind of a peace plan. I'm not saying any of those peace plans were any good. I'm not saying that any of those peace plans were successful, but at least they provided a framework for the administration's actions. This administration has come up with nothing. And again, as the Daily Telegraph writer correctly said, what you actually get is the impression that these guys would rather that the problem in the Middle East simply went away and left them alone so that they could continue doing, well, whatever it is they're doing, which I'm not sure exactly what that is precisely, because frankly, they're not doing very much. But that's the impression of an America on this topic that has gone, again, MIA. It's not involved. It's not participating. Blinken isn't going to Jerusalem. Biden has had this mumbling conversation with Netanyahu, which is all full of cliches. Sullivan talked to the security chief of Qatar. Well, what's that going to do? And that didn't go beyond cliches either. So where is the United States?
That's the point that I want to make. All they have are cliches. That's all we've seen from this entire Biden-Harris White House. I mean, you have Biden getting on there, making speeches about God knows what for, 2-minute soundbite speeches, very controlled, very stage managed. You have Kamala Harris kind of lurking in the background. I mean, really creepy. I mean, she's just kind of creeping there in the background, mascot and everything. And then you have Blinken and Sullivan and all these guys who maybe they're just not intellectually capable of coming up with any decent proposals or decent initiatives to try and figure something out in all of these hotspots, in all of these areas. I mean, maybe we're asking too much of these people, because when you take a look at the Biden White House, it really is just a place with very unimpressive, mediocre people. I mean, we're asking too much of them.
I think you're absolutely right. And by the way, to give a sense of how cliched it is, I was reading all these comments, as I said, from these people, Blinken, Biden, Sullivan, and they all say, about how the United States is going to provide unwavering support for Israel and its security, which is exactly the same thing they said to Zelensky about Ukraine. We're going to provide unwavering support for Ukraine and its territorial integrity. It's almost word for word. It's obviously some kind of canned soundbite that they're reproducing in every situation. It didn't mean anything in Ukraine. That bluff was called there. Why should the Israelis think that it means anything different to them? But it's all cliches. It's all waffle. There's nothing of substance there. And one actually starts to wonder whether these people believe these cliches are incapable of thinking outside them. I mean, I'm sorry, I know some of our viewers get annoyed when we bring up Trump, but the fact was, when Trump spoke, a human being was speaking. He actually had words of his own. You may disagree completely with many of his policies. You might have particularly disagreed with his policies in the Middle East, but they were at least his own. I mean, with this, it's just ritual words, words that ultimately mean nothing.
Yeah, it's completely scripted. I mean, everything is just so completely scripted. It's getting to the point of absurd. You're exactly right. The same stuff that they're telling Israel now is the same stuff they told Ukraine. Literally, copy paste stuff.
It's creepy. It's weird to see this, actually. And the Israelis are not incapable of realizing that. For one thing, I mean, they're very conscious of what was going on in Ukraine. So they're going to look at these two things and they're going to say, my God, they're saying the same things to us that they were saying to the Ukrainians. They don't mean much to us. They didn't mean anything to the Ukrainians. And we saw that in the Ukrainian case, all that they said was of absolutely no value. So what are the Israelis going to think there? Bear in mind, the other thing is that one gets the impression that Biden doesn't like Netanyahu very much. Well, he's entitled to his feelings, but ultimately, he is the president of the United States. He should put those kind of feelings to one side. You have to talk to someone who is your major ally in the Middle East, then you talk to them, and you talk to them properly, not in this bizarre, opaque way in which you're simply repeating what you said to other people, word for word, in that fashion.
Well, the stupidity of it all is that he makes it known that he doesn't like Netanyahu. He makes it known that he doesn't like Erdogan. Fine, you don't like him. You don't have to freaking announce it. That's not diplomacy. That's not called diplomacy. Diplomacy is to not make it known that you don't like these guys. Well, Trump went to North Korea and he met with Kim Jong-un. I mean, that's diplomacy. Once again, absolutely. Like Trump or not, that's diplomacy. Put your feelings aside and put some action in motion. I mean, it's crazy. You had Kamala Harris making phone calls to world leaders. You knew it was going to go off the rails when that happened. You knew it was over. Absolutely. And we also said, with regards to what's going on in the Middle East, we also said in our video, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Turkey, they're all going to get involved. And sure enough, they're all starting to get involved.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely, they are. This is exactly right. Now, as I said, I mean, Putin, I don't know which leaders he likes or doesn't like. I mean, I'm sure he does have his feelings.
He calls them all partners.
But he calls them all partners, exactly.
Even when they're sanctioning him.
Exactly. They're partners, exactly. And what the people in the Middle East who have got a great deal of respect for him, they say he's Putin the fox. You actually hear this because they all realize that he's this clever person they can talk to. And he's always there. He knows how to maneuver. He knows how to play and do his diplomacy. With the US, they get nothing.
Yeah. All right, guys, hit that like, and we're going to put the link for the call in real soon. Alexander, one more question. Do you see any other places that could go wrong? Any other regions? Any other countries? Absolutely. I wrote down 3 right now. And these are dark horses. So these are dark horses, maybe dark horses. Kosovo. I think you always have to look there.
Absolutely. That was the first one on my mind.
Okay.
The very first one on my mind.
Turkey. And I'm saying Turkey, not Erdogan messing around in Libya or messing around in Syria or with what's going on in Israel and Gaza. I mean, Turkey. Maybe you could see a financial meltdown, maybe another coup. I don't know.
Yeah.
Turkey. And then I wrote a real dark horse. France.
Absolutely, entirely agree with that. I mean, again, we have soldiers talking about civil war in France, serving soldiers of the French military. And we've talked about at length on our programs how bad the situation in France is. But again, one senses that the current administration is completely oblivious to all of that. They're not informed about it. They barely speak to Macron or to engage with French leaders at all. This despite the fact that Blinken, by the way, supposedly speaks French. But and so does Kerry too, by the way. But to show no interest in the situation in the country at all. Everybody, by the way, I mean, Germany, which was overjoyed when Biden became president, they're now becoming increasingly concerned. I mean, I've been following the German media, and they are absolutely at a loss in Germany to make any sense of this administration. And I get the same sense in Britain also. The British don't understand what's going on. There are parallels which people are making with the time of Jimmy Carter. That's unfair to Jimmy Carter. It wasn't quite as bad. I mean, I remember him. I mean, bear in mind, Jimmy Carter did broker peace between Israel and Egypt. He brought the two together at Camp David, and he brokered a peace treaty. So, I mean, he was much more involved. But, I mean, I do remember how people were reacting to foreign policy at that time. That is the nearest approximation I can think of to the situation we have now. Only it is much worse.
What about very quickly Turkey, Kosovo? Any comments
Turkey,
on those
Kosovo, the whole Balkans thing is a ticking time bomb. And we've discussed many times on our programs that NATO policy has been disastrous. It's surrounded Serbia with all kinds of fragile and unstable microstates, all of which are dependent ultimately on US and NATO support. And we have a Serbia that feels aggrieved against all of them. And we see people in Bosnia, the Serbs in Bosnia now pushing ever more for union with Serbia. And of course, we've got this ticking time bomb, which is Kosovo, which frankly, I mean, it is the real heart of the problem. Again, I don't think Westerners have understood to what an extent it is. But again, the only thing that's been keeping a lid on this thing has been American power. I've always felt if that went away, there was a risk that things could blow up. The right thing to do is to recognize that fact, diffuse this bomb, if you like, by engaging in real intelligent and constructive negotiations. It's not what the West has been doing. On the contrary, it's been making the situation worse. And in the meantime, now we have a general sense that the US, its will, its interest is slackening. So that creates all the conditions for a blow up there in the Balkans too. And by the way, when we mentioned the Balkans, we mentioned Turkey. Turkey, it's again impossibly difficult to explain how unstable the situation in Turkey has become. We have all these jihadi groups and movements that were drawn to Turkey because they became involved in the war in Syria. We had the Turkish government sponsoring all these groups. We've got Turkey becoming the great transit state of the refugee flows to Europe. And we've got an economy in Turkey which is in a completely unstable and almost impossible to understand condition, and a president who has managed to antagonize everybody and who is quickly losing all detachment or connection to reality, so far as I can see. Now, Turkey came very close to civil war, as I think we both remember, at the end of the 1970s. I mean, it was touch and go. It's not a fully stable country at the best of times. The situation in Turkey at the moment is not the best of times. It is entirely possible that things could go seriously wrong in Turkey. We've talked about soldiers in France complaining about the actions of the French president. We've seen the same thing happen, by the way, in the US with soldiers, admirals, and people like that doing that there. But perhaps most ominously of all, just a few weeks ago, we had Turkish admirals writing a public letter complaining about the building of this canal through the Istanbul Canal, which will somehow bypass the Bosphorus, and saying that that was a threat to Turkey's security and stability. Now, that was, by the way, the letter that started all the others. It was when the Turkish Navy was making all those points. And of course, in a country like Turkey, given how dangerous, in a way, it's become for military officers to speak out in Turkey, where, you know, they face threats from Erdogan's police. Well, the fact that they were prepared to do that shows again how uneasy and restless and tense the situation has become. By the way, if there is a crisis in Turkey, I mean, that will eclipse all the others. I mean, be under no doubt about it. I mean, Turkey is the absolute pivot around which everything else turns.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's all a house of cards, and you know, the US is like that bottom foundation card, and it's just once that card gets pulled, it's all up in the air.
Yeah, but again, you see, one gets the sense that President Biden doesn't like Erdogan, so he doesn't talk to him. He doesn't engage with Turkey at all.
He says it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He says it. So exactly. So, I mean, I get the impression, by the way, that Putin has difficulties with Erdogan. He talks with him every week because he has to, because he is the president of Russia, and it is in Russia's interests to. And that's the correct actions of a statesman. You have to put all that aside. You may find it, you know, disagreeable to do, but you weren't elected president. You didn't become president to do only the things you liked.
Yeah, well, there's no more statesmen in the United States at this point, Alexander. It's all about feelings.
Exactly.
And if Biden and Harris feel very badly towards Erdogan, then they should have talked to him.
Yeah, I mean, Erdogan, they feel badly about. Netanyahu, they feel badly about. Even Putin, that, but at the end of the day, they want to talk to Putin. It's only that he's not very keen on talking to them, because he says to them, "What's the agenda? What are we supposed to talk about?" And they're not able to say.
They have no clue. Yeah. All right, let's do. Actually, we have some really good questions on these topics as well from the super chats, Alexander. And Hunger is asking, just as in the Soviet Union, the global empire collapses both at the center and at the periphery.
Yeah,
they have no new ideas. The propaganda is stale. All our elites need to do is decide to end this farce. Wow, what a comment.
Absolutely, what a brilliant comment. Entirely true. I mean, what can I add to it? I mean, I agree.
Yeah, great comment from Hunger. From We Kieran, hi from Donegal, Ireland. Great show last week. Could Hezbollah become involved in the Palestine-Israel events and free Assad? Of course, free Assad, and we mentioned Hezbollah. We mentioned them in a video we did, that they're going to jump in on this. And
well, of course they
are.
Absolutely. And, you know, Hamas has its rockets, which it's firing. But, of course, the rockets that Hezbollah has are on a totally different scale. So Hezbollah gets involved, and that's incredibly bad. And, well, they probably will get involved because, again, why shouldn't they? That is their raison d'etre, if you will. So, I mean, I entirely can see this happening. And, again, wise, effective statesmanship would understand that and will try to control the situation, and it is nowhere to be seen.
Yeah. From Hunger, the best thing about decline in U.S. hegemony is the potential to return to a more natural global order, i.e. pre-World War I. We can finally put the worst century of all time, the 20th century, behind us. It goes back, that's a great comment from Hunger. It goes back to my first question to you, which is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is it kind of in the middle? I mean, you know, it's that question where you examine, you know, for example, the Middle East. What has the U.S. accomplished in the Middle East? And you just, you know, it's just destruction.
I entirely agree, and I think this is completely true. And I think we are still dealing with the legacies of the 20th century in many ways, and the pathologies that stirred up and created. And I'm afraid the way in which the United States has conducted foreign policy is a reflection of that. I am not someone who believes at all that the United States should be meddling, intervening, involving itself in everything all the time and in every way, as it has been doing. I think, on the contrary, that has been a disaster. And in fact, it has made the situation far more unstable and far worse. But at the same time, the United States remains a great power if it simply withdraws, having created all this instability and all this mess. Then it will simply leave a disaster behind it. Now, there's been a brilliant article by the British historian Richard Sackwer, who has made exactly the point that's just been made, that we need to return to some of the structures of the pre-1914 world. And during that period of time, in the 19th century, there was what was called the Concert of Europe. Now, the Concert of Europe was that whenever there was a crisis, the great powers would come together and they would talk it through, and they would come to arrangements which primarily were intended to preserve peace by maintaining the balance between the great powers. So the result was that none of them would feel threatened directly. The reason the World War I broke out was because that Concert of Europe broke down because one power, Germany, didn't understand its rules properly at that time and wasn't working according to them. But that's another story. Anyway, Richard Sackwer says this is what we need to see happen today. We need to return to a kind of concert using the structures of the international system of international law, which were created, by the way, largely under the influence of American jurists at the end of the Second World War. They provide a foundation, and the Concert of Europe of the 19th century provides the example. And that would be the right way to do it. But that's not what we're seeing people in Washington want to do. They still think of themselves as the indispensable nation, except at the same time, they're not doing anything.
Right. All right. From Mark Hewitt, actually forgot this conflict as well. You forgot the one possible conflict, and that is Egypt and Ethiopia. What effect a defeated Egypt would be on Israel? It's a great observation.
Absolutely, completely true. And in fact, I was reading articles about this, about the fact that, there's talk about Egypt launching a war against Ethiopia over this dam project. Again, where is the United States about this? What is it doing? Is it talking to the Egyptians? Is it talking to the Ethiopians? Is it involved in any of the negotiations? Well, maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it's not the job of the United States to do these things. But the problem is, because the United States has involved itself in all of these issues for so long and in that sort of way, it has weakened all the other international structures that might have made it possible at one time to broker compromises between countries like this. So again, it's entirely likely, it's quite possible that we could see a conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia. God knows how that's going to turn out, but it will be an absolute disaster. And of course, there's Ethiopia and Egypt that are possibly in conflict. There's all kinds of problems in West Africa. There's a major crisis, there's rumbling civil wars in places like Mali and Nigeria. There's very militant Islamist movements there, which are essentially out of control, and which wax and wane and sometimes become stronger, sometimes become weaker. So there's a potential crisis there too. There's also potential crisis in Latin America also. I mean, there's major protests in Colombia, a key American ally. Venezuela is far from resolved and the situation there remains grim. But again, where is the United States? It's to some extent created these problems. It's not offering any solutions.
At this point, with this administration, it's not capable. Trump had a plan, at least with the Middle East, I believe. It's just my opinion, but looking at the signs of what he was doing, and he did broker many deals. He did have an overall grand strategy. I really believe that his second term, he wanted to implement some sort of grand strategy. And I even think that involved Iran as well. But that's just my hunch. But,
I agree. I think he was working towards that.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, he's probably not the kind of person who would be able to sit down and set it all out in a piece of paper. I mean, besides, that wasn't his style. I mean, he was, to a great extent, an instinctive politician, somebody who works his way towards something. But I think he did have an overall idea about where he wanted to go in the Middle East. You had a trajectory, if you like. This lot have nothing.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Let's do one more super chat. We'll get to calls. And also JZM, welcome to the Duran community. Great to have you with us. Yeah. From Charlie, CCC says, they say the Palestinians are genocidal, but just look at what the neocons have said about the Arabs in Palestine. The rhetoric has been disgusting.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. And for a very, very long time, and I go again sometimes to some American commentaries, not recent, just recent ones, things that have been said over many years. And I mean, they're horrifying to read, and they don't have any real empathy for the people involved or for the problems they have. But then, of course, the problem with neocons is that they ultimately are not about people. They're not really concerned about the people in these countries. They see them as pieces in a grand chessboard that they're maneuvering and playing with. And that requires them very often to demonize people who stand in the way of whatever chess game they want to play. To be very clear, the chess games that the neocons play are not a grand strategy. They're not a vision, because they're not based on any conception of humanity. They are all based upon very odd ideas born from geopolitical thinking of the early 20th century, and also developed by people like Brzezinski, which have no real conception, no real feel for the history and humanity of societies. And that's why you get these terrible articles. I spend hours reading these things, and I sometimes come away deeply shocked by the things I read.
No, they play checkers, Alexander, and neocons. God, Victoria Nuland was back in Ukraine. Think about that for a second. I want everyone who's watching this to think about that. Victoria Nuland, the person that was passing out cookies and bread in the Maidan, pushing for the coup, is now back in Ukraine, sitting across the table from Zelensky and basically telling the president of Ukraine, we're taking your country, like it or not.
Absolutely. I mean,
we've come full circle.
We've come full circle in a very, very bad way, absolutely appalling way. And the fact that she apparently came with that kind of agenda tells you again that she's never really been interested in Ukraine itself or in Ukraine's people. That's never been part of it. But that's neocons always. For them, it's always playing a game, a chess game against an opponent, by the way, quite often. Russia in many cases, China sometimes, which doesn't exist because countries like Russia and China don't play chess. They do real diplomacy. They do real foreign policy. They approach things in a radically different way from the way the neocons do, which is why everything the neocons do in the end fails.
Yeah. No, we haven't forgotten the neoliberals. They are definitely, two sides of the same coin. No doubt about it.
The neocons and the neoliberals are exactly two sides of the same coin. And if I have to say, of the two, I dislike the neoliberals even more because they're the people who always come up with all the human rights excuses, the humanitarian wars, the humanitarian intervention, the R2P. They are the ones who come up with all of these, apologias and excuses for doing all these terrible things. So, to be very clear, we haven't forgotten them in the slightest, but neocons is somehow a sort of easier word to slip into.
Yeah, it's hard to tell the difference nowadays. All right, James P93 says, missiles fired at Jerusalem plays right into the hardliners who want the mosque destroyed and the third temple rebuilt. This is a long-term strategy.
Well, I get to say straightforwardly this. I mean, this idea that people have of throwing missiles. It's absolutely shocking, and it's completely wrong. And if Hamas really cared about Palestinians and really cared about the sanctuary, it wouldn't do it. I mean, what they're up to, in my opinion, I'm sure there are going to be some people who won't agree with me, but I'm going to say, I think that they're doing it partly in order to maneuver, to embarrass the rival Palestinian Authority on the West Bank. They're saying, we're resisting Israel and you're not. And that means that we are strong and you are cowardly. And I think it's a disastrous idea. And I think it's going to do exactly what the viewer said. It's going to play into the hands of the hardliners on every side. I think, again, wise diplomacy is to try to impress on everybody in the Middle East that this is an extremely dangerous road to follow, counterproductive, and to offer some way forward. You can't just come along and say calm. We want everybody to calm down and go back to how things were, and then offer nothing.
All right.
Because they're not going to. They're not going to go that way.
Okay, let's take some calls, Alexander. We got a lot of people waiting, so let's try to keep the questions for the calls direct to the point, and let's try to get everyone in who's waiting. So let's bring in Odysee to kick it off. Odysee, you with us?
Hello, gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes. How are you?
Excellent. If you're familiar with the Road to Nowhere song of Talking Heads, I believe when insanity surrounds you, all you have to do, all you may do is laugh. So I'm laughing. You mentioned that U.S. Foreign policy now seems like missing in action. Yes, but maybe what if it is WAD, work as designed? If we may think United States has been conquered from inside, and clearly strange ideology took power. This globalist, dystopia, ecologist, anti-Christian, you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
But these people obviously come into conflict with the United States as a nation interest and its people. And I don't think they can fully control United States.
No.
You can see what's happening in Texas, in Florida, and all the normal politicians and probably other forces there are opposed to this strange behavior. And but they can do one thing: paralyze United States as the leader of the free world. It's a little bit exaggerated, but let's keep this very well-known term. And you see what's happening. Everything is going apart. And I believe you mentioned a few days ago Lavrov in a moment when he simply almost couldn't control himself with fury, with anger. I believe the Russians, Russian politicians, which are very astute in foreign policy, realize the danger of the situation. Clearly, they have no one to talk to in the United States. I believe China is not up to the task. They don't have the same subtlety the Russians diplomacy has. And this would be my question. What if not MIA, but work as designed? What's happening now? And as just a small parenthesis about France. France, US is where France already was. I believe the last French president was clearly de Gaulle, maybe Pompidou, but afterwards it's all got down the drain. Maybe they had their Trump moment with Chirac when the referendum, which initially blocked the European Union constitution succeeded, because Chirac allowed an honest debate. United States has tried with Trump to reverse the course, but clearly it failed. This
Absolutely.
is my question.
Absolutely.
What is this work as designed?
Well, I think you're right. I think there is some degree of design, in the sense that I think some people in Washington, or at least in the United States, have a very, very ideological perspective of things, which possess exactly. And when people think in a totally ideological way, they react in certain ways, and they make decision making extraordinarily difficult. So I think that they do want to see some kind of degree of paralysis in American decision making. But of course, that in a sense it may explain what is happening. But the fact is, what we've talked about is that missing of that in action, whether it is intended or whether it is not intended, it is coming with these. It's happening. It's coming with these consequences. And there have been previous points in US history when the US has not been entirely in control of its foreign policy hasn't been managed particularly well. It was true, for example, with Jimmy Carter's time to some extent. But the United States in those days had the time and space to turn things round. It was indisputably the world's most powerful country. Today, it doesn't have that time, and it doesn't have that space. So yes, theoretically, it can turn things round once more, but its time frame for doing it is much shorter, and it can't afford to just throw away 4 years, which it seems to be what it is about to do. So that's my worry. 4 years is a very long time.
Yes.
In international relations, especially today, when the United States is facing an economic, political, military, technological challenge from the Eurasian powers that it's never had to face before. Now,
sorry.
Now, on the point specifically you made about China and Russia, and about the Russians being very angry, they are extremely angry. You're totally correct. And on the point about China lacking the skills to manage things in the way that the Russians to some extent do, and the United States once did, that is also true. And you will be interested to know it is acknowledged by the Chinese themselves. It's a really very interesting things that the Chinese have said, that one of the reasons why, from their point of view, this arrangement with Russia is so useful to them is precisely because the Russians have a greater experience of this kind of diplomacy and a more a subtle understanding of how things should be done than the Chinese do themselves, and that this is really very useful to China at this point in its history. So it's interesting that the Chinese have that degree of self-awareness. You're absolutely right, and they themselves acknowledge it. And that's been something, by the way, which I've seen, and it surprised me, and it shows a certain realism in Beijing, which is impressive.
Yes, indeed. And maybe it comes along with the last thing I wanted to mention. The globalists might not be very bright, but they understand very well one thing. A multipolar world is a nation-state world. A balance of power between nation-states. They
true.
Really don't accept the idea of nation-state.
Or in a sense, you put your finger on it.
Great point.
That is, you're absolutely, completely right. That's on the contrary, that whole concept is obnoxious to them. It's precisely what they are against, and that works against any kind of idea of a concert of powers.
Okay, I leave other people. Thank you very much.
Great call. Great call. Great points.
And just a question, I believe the others would be interested. In the end, what is your platform of choice? Odysee or I follow you everywhere, but I can't.
We'll see. We'll see which one.
Yeah,
we'll see which ones rise. Hopefully, we'll have a
my
couple
opinion,
of them that rise.
technically, the best flow of video is Rumble, but Odysee indeed is very friendly, and
yeah, I agree.
But I had quite often experience cluttering, and I
agree with you.
These problems, but I wanted to mention in case.
Yes.
Yeah, they all have strengths in different areas, and
yes, YouTube.
We'll see.
Unfortunately, is still the best.
We'll give it time, and a few of them I think will break out of the pack, and we'll see. All right, Anna says thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye. All right, great call. Let's bring in Peter into the stream here. Peter, are you ready?
Hello, gents.
Hello.
How are you?
Can you hear me okay? Hi.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. I've got I read an extremely interesting article recently that really clarified matters for me on the 5 generations of warfare. This is it's extremely interesting because this shows how the people who actually have power actually think and what their strategy is. And effectively, on these 5 generations, the first 3 are effectively a conventional warfare, which is pretty unpleasant. You know, you have guys with bayonets and masked ranks and uniforms and all that type of stuff. So as the warfare has progressed, it's gone through this this phase of states fighting each other. And a theory states that a 4th generation warfare is fought through non-state actors. So it's like in the Middle East, say. So it's color revolution. So it's going and it's using proxy forces, all this type of stuff. So it's Cold War, proxy warfare. A 5th generation warfare, which seems to be where we are, according to this article, which I thought was very informative in a sinister sort of way, is where you strip away the idea of the enemy in a different country, and you effectively have a propaganda war, a war, not just propaganda, it's through all sorts of mechanisms that are in the background. But the whole intention of a 5th generation warfare is that the person being the group being attacked isn't aware of it. So in essence, it's through it could be through sanctions, it could be through economic warfare, it could be through effective ideology and proxy war of people who inside a country that you're stirring up, like the Wiggers or like BLM in America. So you have this proxy war where you're effectively sending out lots of information that is going to stir up various factors inside the enemy. So you effectively break them down. It's a form of psychological warfare.
Yes.
But the point of this article was that whereas 4th generation warfare is you're doing it to a different country, in 5th you're doing it internally as well. So you could have allies in Afghanistan who are on your side. Let's say you're an American an agency, say the FBI, sort of, etc. You could have people in Afghanistan who are on your side, and they're your friends, and you can utilize them. Your enemy may be in America, so they may be the target. So it's not the friend enemy is now internationalized. It's not it's destatized, so it's not the state doing it anymore. It's done through proxies, and the objective is to destroy the enemy without them knowing about it. So they never know they're actually under attack. They're just broken down. If that's an assessment of military thinking on this base, or at least it's a published and a presented idea regarding that's where we are now. Doesn't that sort of explain to some degree where we are in terms of there's China, America stuff, all of the proxy was, the information was, even Russiagate and all that type of thing. They're talking about 5G warfare. They're saying these people are getting inside and they are stirring up things. So it seems to me that if you understand 5G warfare, you actually understand a lot of what's going on, and a lot of the narratives and subtext, and it's very sinister because it points to a world of anarchy, and also it's not necessarily I mean, as a conventional warfare is pretty ugly, you'll have guys shooting you and effectively burning your cities down, etc. This also is pretty ugly in the sense that it can move towards violence and you can be stirring up violence. So it is proxy war inside your country and outside of it. And it's quite happy to use violence. In fact, warfare implies that. So it's happy to go there if it needs to. So my question after my massive preamble, and apologies for that, is have you thought about this, and how far does it explain things, and how far is it just a trendy theory amongst military strategists and talking heads and such like?
Well, it is something that is talked about an awful lot, and I should say that it's also, to my knowledge, especially talked a lot about in Russia, where they feel that they've been to some extent exposed to this kind of war. It's featured a great deal in Russian publications. I think it does exist. I think it is real. And I think it is also very much part of the intellectual atmosphere, if you like. It's a kind of form of postmodernist warfare, deconstructing war, if I could put it in that way. These are ideas, by the way, borrowed from postmodernist criticism, which has heavily affected the whole conduct of politics in the West, especially. It explains why we, have a post-fact world, why, theories, conspiracy theories like Russiagate can be given all that kind of traction, and it all blends into that. So I think there is a great deal of truth to this. And as I said, certainly the Russians, I know for a fact, take it extremely seriously. The only thing I would say is ultimately, this kind of style of war, if it is war, can only take you so far. If you practice it within your own society, you destabilize your own society. And if you're going to take on another society with these sort of tools, then of course, ultimately, you can find yourself in all kinds of problems, because war is ultimately a kinetic thing, to use, again, the term that these people come up with. And that means that it is decided by guns and weapons and people who fight. And if you try to face up to that with all of these concepts, then it doesn't always work for you. But certainly these ideas exist. Certainly they have traction. Certainly they are practiced. I think they are more practiced by intelligence agencies than by general staffs, if I have to say it. And I think that they are very much part of, as I said, the general intellectual atmosphere, what some people call cultural Marxism, a term which I don't use, by the way, but postmodernism is my preferred use. And it's, as I said, ultimately a dangerous form of war, because it demoralizes your own society probably more quickly than it demoralizes the enemy. And if your enemy is better organized than you, then it can actually cause you more problems. So certainly these things exist, and certainly they explain a great deal. They explain a lot about Russiagate, for instance.
Well, it's also a form of class warfare to some degree, and it's a form of globalization, whereby it's global actors fighting against a nation state. So in that sense, it sort of it seems to be explaining where we are, that we have this detached sort of elite, which really is looking at the world and saying, well, actually, we actually like these people, we can use these people, and we want to wipe these people out, and we want to get any mechanism we can to actually achieve that. So I think it shows a dangerous mentality, which I can increasingly see. I mean, all warfare is pretty ugly. But
absolutely.
This is a specific type of warfare. It's actually a psychological warfare, really amped up, and with a lot of money and power behind it, and also violence.
Anyway,
so it's borderless warfare. So it's extremely worrying, gents.
Anyway, Peter, send me that article. I'd be very interested to read it. And as I said, I mean, it is consistent, as I said, with the concept of deconstruction. War traditionally is associated with the state. So you have war without the state, in effect. You take the state out because as a globalist, you don't like the state, and globalism is all about these things. But as I said, we could talk about these things for a long time.
Yeah.
I think we have to move on.
But
these are not, as I said, unheard of concepts. I'd be very interested to read this article indeed.
Okay, I've sent it to you.
Shoot us off the article, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, great. Let's bring in Bede.
Hey guys, how's it going?
How are you doing?
Pretty good. So I'm from New Zealand. So the Five Eyes thing was kind of out of left field for us. It was a mostly secret sort of thing up until like the mid 2000s before it really became an open sort of secret that everyone sort of knew about. You know, it was purely information only, but I just can't help but get the feeling that someone in the US State Department thought, we need some allies on this China thing. What kind of agreement can we pick up that's got some of these people that are allies with us? And can we just throw in some values in there and just say, hey, you're an ally, you should do this. And it just seems so terrible. Why would you pick something that's a secret information gathering thing, apply values to it, and make everyone think, oh, hey, this thing's bad. We don't want people talking about this. And, you know, drawing attention to it. It would have been better if they had done something else that didn't bring attention to this particular agreement.
But you're absolutely right. Can I just say it's the same in Britain? I mean, we are obviously one of the a major part of the Five Eyes. I mean, we were one of the original partners, like New Zealand and Australia was. And what we have discovered in Britain is that the Five Eyes is ultimately a great deal more than just an intelligence arrangement. It is also a mechanism that the US uses or has used in order to leverage Britain into doing all kinds of things, which left Britain left to itself might have decided it didn't want to do. So it's a strange thing, because it, on the face of it, it is an intelligence sharing agreement which goes back to the Second World War, but in practice it's come to mean an awful lot more than just that. And as in New Zealand, it's not something people talked about very much until very recently. It's only the last decade since the Bush administration announced its war on terror, for example, that people began to become really aware of it. And we come to realize how important it is in the kind of way things happen here.
Yeah, so that's what drives me crazy. So the other part is our Prime Minister, Ardern, has been talking with Macron, and Macron's a co-signatory, and she's actually going after censorship on the web. So she's working to censor Facebook and put this integration thing in, and Macron's a co-signer on her deal where she's doing the globalist thing. And I just couldn't help but feel when I heard about it initially last year, I just thought, had she never heard of the yellow vests? I mean, who was Macron going to go for? This is the perfect tool that he needs to clamp down. And then further to that, you've now got all these French generals not quite so happy with things going on, and this sort of plays right into what Macron needs to get this censorship thing going. So these guys can no longer publish these articles or
absolutely
enforce censorship.
Yeah.
She's part of the Blair school, isn't she? She's also from was part of
she's
the Blair.
on the Labour side.
Blair. She was working for Blair, wasn't she, at one point in the UK?
I can't really comment on that.
I believe she was. Someone in the chat may want to correct, but I know that she's definitely from that school. So I mean, they're all cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I go on, Pete.
The most ridiculous thing for me is only people who've facilitated terror in our country have been a NATO member, France, on the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior, and last year an Australian citizen. I mean, for us, we're more at harm from a NATO ally or an English-speaking country than we are from basically anyone else in the world.
Oh, it's true enough. I remember the Rainbow Warrior episode extremely well, by the way. And can I just say that was an attack in New Zealand against a boat that was going to monitor, peace campaigners, anti-nuclear campaigners who were attempting to stop the French nuclear tests in Mururoa. And the French Secret Service planted a bomb on it. It was just shocking, absolutely appalling thing.
They were terrible actors, so they were as bad as these Russian guys. Like, I mean, if you want some class spies, these guys they did their thing. They took their rubber boat, they landed on a popular beach, so everybody saw them.
Yeah,
here they are, downtown, middle of the day. Everybody sees this guy walking across the beach. Two foresters in the middle of nowhere saw some strange French people, so they wrote the registration number down. The French, being penny scrimpers, when they went to return the rental van, the person there called the police because they knew the registration number. They said, "Oh, hey, these guys come back," and to get the agents to stay there, he said, "Oh, we might have to give you a refund, for like a €50 or something." So they stuck around to get the refund, and then the police picked them up right there at the station.
Well, there you go. But no, seriously, I'm going to say something. One of the things that is really anguishing is that both France and New Zealand, I mean, in Britain, we have this conception of New Zealand as this extremely democratic, free place. I mean, more so than Britain. It's the place people emigrate to because it's free of class issues in the way that Britain is. People are much freer there. It's more democratic. So to see restrictions like that starting to appear in New Zealand is very disturbing. And for me personally, it's also disturbing to see them in France, because of course France was the country that used to stand out alongside the United States most staunchly for free speech. It was very much a fundamental Republican principle that the French established, especially in the late 19th century. And the French press laws that were published in the late 19th century basically said that, if you weren't breaking the law, you could publish and write anything and nobody should restrict you. And it's extraordinary to see how in the last 10 years that's been eroded away.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Just
one last thing. It's the US did itself a real disservice by killing Soleimani in Iraq. So this leads on to what the US Department they just don't understand the cultures that they're dealing with.
No, they don't.
You cannot, as an Arab, kill an invited guest like that. You're just, he was invited by the government to talk, and they murdered him at the airport. You just can't kill an invited guest. If you invite someone into your house in Iraq, as I was told by my neighbor, you have to give them food and shelter. You cannot harm them as an invited guest. So by doing this thing, they basically just turn the whole country against them, whether they know it or not. But I don't think the US thinks through these things when they do these things.
They often don't, and it's repeatedly worked against them. The United States generally, because it hasn't had to engage with other countries as equals at any point in its history, basically, doesn't understand sometimes the need to take stock and to take note of these cultural factors, which are so important. Other countries, Russians, because the Russians have very often in their history been a much weaker power than the countries around them, are very, very attuned to this sort of thing. And that's one important difference.
And then, so now Saudi and Iran, I think, seeing this US vacuum, is slowly trying to work out some sort of arrangement. I don't quite know the details, but
that's
they
very
definitely
important.
don't want to go against each other. They just want to have some way they can talk, not escalate anything, but try and avoid needing to bring in the US to deal with any of their issues.
You've touched on an enormously important point, because of course we've got secret negotiations, which are not so secret, going on in Iraq between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And the deal that has apparently been worked out is that Saudi Arabia will assist Iran to sell its oil, which is supposedly under US sanctions, and in return Iran will rein in the Houthis, who have been attacking Saudi oil installations. That is a game changer, and that's happening in parallel with Saudi moves to patch up relations with Syria. But that's a huge topic, Bede, and I think if we're going to discuss it, we should probably do a proper program about it, because I mean, that is a part of the tectonic shifts that are happening in the Middle East. And you're absolutely right. It is a consequence, a product of this change in US policy, or rather this absence of US policy that we've been talking about on this program. Okay.
Right. Perfect. Thanks for that, guys.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, let's see. We'll bring in Dr. Bill. If Dr. Bill is ready, let's bring him into the stream. Dr. Bill, we hear you.
On.
Yes. All good.
Good morning from the forest of Gainesville.
All right.
How are you doing? Today. Beautiful day. A little windy, but I have to keep this this umbrella here from blowing it over. But at any rate, I have some. I mean, everything is just right on today. What you're saying, everything. But what I can tell you is, or what my things today are, number one, America is a ship without a rudder. I mean, they have nothing. I mean, there's nothing there. And now with the Russia-China double helix and the fact that they've officially brought Iran into it, it was unofficial previously, but they brought Iran into it. And that's what's behind China's, confidence and I guess this wolf warrior thing. I don't know really what that is, but it's got them. They've got a head of steam. Russia has laid down, the Riot Act, and the United States knows that they can't do anything. So, it's a completely different ballgame now. So what is the problem? We can't make any kind of a détente with Russia. It's never been allowed. And it all goes back to the MI6 and the deep state and the previous iterations of it. But they've been, the Great Game all the way back to the mid 1800s. Britain has been trying to control Eurasia. And so as a result of that, the MI6 deep state, which helped create the CIA in its own image, really controls the U.S. State Department, Pentagon, deep state, because it all goes back to Cecil Rhodes and his wills. It all goes back to that. So every time the United States tries to normalize with Russia, something happens to the guy who's doing it. So it began with McKinley. He was assassinated because he was really trying to make peace or continue the Lincoln thing and its alliance or attempted alliance with Russia. He couldn't do it. They killed McKinley. Then you come to FDR. He tried to do it. He made it. He set up the alliance. At the end of the Second World War, he wanted to free all these colonies that were controlled by Britain and the other European countries. He wanted to do that, but he died too early. Let's see. The guy who assassinated McKinley was an anarchist, a typical guy who's controlled by the British deep state. FDR tried. He made Russia our ally in Second World War, but before the war, he tried to normalize relations with Russia. And Prescott Bush and his Wall Street cronies went after FDR. They went to the wrong guy. They went to Smedley Butler, who was a real patriot, and they tried to get him to overthrow the government and bring in all the VFW people to take over the government. It was a 500,000 person army, and he played along, did the right thing. He wrote them in. Then he went to Congress with it, and then of course it got eventually deep state, deep sixed. There was a sham investigation, and it didn't go anywhere. Then so they got, and the other thing they did was in 1940, when at the presidential convention, they were able to preempt FDR having Henry Wallace as his vice president again, which he wanted, and they sabotaged the whole thing. They put Truman in, who was someone that they could control, and then Truman was not on board with what FDR wanted to do, and what Wallace wanted to do, and the four freedoms that of Russia, of FDR. Freedom from want and all of that, and so he had to put up with Truman, and then Truman becomes president, and he's not going to have any detente with Russia because he's controlled by these British deep state cronies, and then you come to JFK, or no, actually Eisenhower. He wanted to end the Cold. He wanted to try and have detente, and he had this conference set up with, I guess it was Macmillan, who was the head of Britain, and they were going to have a conference and try and normalize the Cold War or end that, and then you have the U-2 incident, which there's a book about that, and he was. That was another sabotage job to try detente. Then JFK also was trying to stop or not go to or end the Vietnam conflict, and he wasn't able to do it. He had an order set up, and they assassinated him. And shortly after that, the troops started going back, and the war started. They had the Gulf of Tonkin, which was, that was another false flag event. And so it just goes on, and then you get to Trump eventually. Also Nixon. There's a book called Silent Coup that explains what happened in Watergate. He was tricked by John Dean, who was the traitor in his administration, who was also controlled by the state. And because Nixon wanted to normalize and wanted a detente with Russia, he couldn't do it. Then you come to Reagan. 2 months in, he wanted to end the Cold War and end stagflation. 2 months in, they tried to assassinate it. The bullet missed by 1 inch. 1 inch in one direction would have hit his heart, and that would have been the end of Reagan. But he survived. Then he tried to have detente in his second term. That got sabotaged during during the whole thing by the generals. Then he finally did it, and then we get the Clintons.
Is your point, Dr. Bill, that there's always going to be this opposition to détente? Because that's absolutely the case. I mean, I remember listening to a Russian official, very senior Russian official, called Sergei Ivanov, who is still on the Russian Security Council and was formerly defense minister. And he said that he's been through so many iterations, so many attempts to create détente between the United States and Russia, that he's given up believing that it will ever really happen. But so, I mean, I agree. I mean, there's going to be enormous resistance to it. I have to take issue with one particular point you make, which is that it's always the British who are at the back of it. I mean, there have been British politicians and British leaders who have been keen on détente with Russia. It's not widely known, but Winston Churchill, for example, was very keen to patch things up with the Russians at the beginning of the 50s. So, in a different way, was Macmillan at the end of the 50s. So was Harold Wilson in the 60s. So, you mustn't assume or project upon us a consistent policy. At this particular point in time, which we're going through, the British are going through an extraordinary anti-Russian phase, which, as a Briton, depresses me enormously. But that's not always been the way of our foreign policy.
Well, I'm not saying it's the foreign policy establishment. I'm saying it's the deep state MI6. They're the ones who are doing it. And it's just like in the US, the CIA does things and sabotages the government, United States government. MI6 does the same thing when it comes to this particular thing, is the détente with Russia.
Well, I mean, certainly there are people in Britain and many people in the intelligence services who always oppose détente. Certainly there are people in the United States who do. I doubt, to be straightforward about it, that British intelligence has that degree of influence on what goes on in the US. I mean, given the relative power of the two countries, the US is so much stronger. To my mind, increasingly, it's the US that has had the greater influence on Britain, as opposed to Britain having the influence on the US. Your overriding point, though, that Britain, and both in Britain and the US, there is always institutional resistance to détente with Russia, is absolutely true. And I've seen it recur again and again and again. And can I just say, when we talk about détente, it's important always to understand what we mean. Détente is not friendship, it's not an alliance. It is the relaxation of tensions. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that we become friends with the Russians. Nobody in the West, in Britain or the United States, ever seriously wants that. It's always all about trying to reduce the tensions that are there and are going to remain there to a controllable level. Now, at best, that is what we're going to see over the next few months. We're not going to see any actual rapprochement. Certainly, the Democrats in the United States are not for that. Many Republicans are not for that. And at this particular point in time, you're quite right, the British government is completely opposed to that. But détente, a relaxation of tensions for a temporary period, might happen, I think, it's simply because the United States is now up against a situation where it has no alternative. But even then, saying that it's got no alternative doesn't mean necessarily that people in Washington will accept that and will act on that realization, because that assumes a degree of realism from them, which isn't always there. So, I hope I've explained my views on this.
Oh, yes, you have. But if you go back to 1776, at that time, Russia was our ally.
No, absolutely.
And if you just read the things that Matthew Arrett has had on your articles that he has on the Duran and his videos at Canadian Patriot, back then Russia was our ally. They saved us in the Civil War. They saved Lincoln, and so if you go back far enough, we were allies. And Sun Yat-sen in China they had this huge thing. They were trying to set up real freedom all over the world, and it was going to be set up by the United States, the Russian Empire at that time, and Sun Yat-sen.
Yeah, this is quite true. I mean, I've actually been in. If you go to the grounds of the palace, the Imperial Palace in St. Petersburg, Tsarskoye Selo, the summer palace of the emperors, you will find there a monument which is to one of the U.S. presidents of that era. It dates from the 1850s. I can't remember which one. Might be Polk or someone like that. I'm American history. I don't remember exactly which one. But yes, at that time, the Americans and the Russians were on very good terms. And of course, they also felt in those days they were two great continental countries, and they had an awful lot in common with each other. Obviously, there were great differences in the political system.
American people and Russian people get along great.
Absolutely. And let's hope that happens. That comes back one day. But for the moment, as I said, it's the best we are looking at is a relaxation of tensions. We're not going to get anything more. And I think that the political class in Washington and London and Brussels is going to be very, very resistant even to achieving that. It's going to be a massive undertaking if we get that far.
Yes. Agreed. So, great talking with you. That's my thing for this week. And hopefully I'll see you all again next week in another live stream.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Great talking to you, Bill. Look forward to talking next week. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Dr. Bill. Take care. All right, let's bring in Google Whistleblower. You are in the stream.
How y'all doing? Thanks for taking my call, man.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, man. First of all, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. Okay. Dr. Bill, he was dropping some knowledge because I watched Matthew Edwards, That's what I want to say. I have 4 comments. I'm trying to go through them. Okay. China came out last week. The ministry, Lord Jesus, what's this? Okay, her name is Hugh Chilling, foreign ministry spokeswoman. She came out and said that the U.S. is always putting its finger at everybody else, talking about human rights abuses, journalism, throwing journalists in jail and all that. But you got a man by the name of Mr. Assange that's in prison based off, U.S. She said this last week, and people started tweeting it out and everything. So that means somebody in China gave her permission to say that. So I'm gonna say China, is saying that, instead of just she's saying it. And also she came out, the France24.com article came out saying that China urges UN to act on Israel-Palestinian conflict. Now it goes on to say that the Chinese, however, due to the obstruction of individual countries, no agreement has been reached so far, added Hugh, which we already know what country that is. The Security Council should take action to reiterate its commitment to and firm support for a two-state solution. Wow. One of 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, China holds a rotating presidency this month, which means they're going to be the president for it this month. So they want a de-escalation what's going on in that region. They want to push the two-state solution that I think we should have. I'm also BDS movement. I feel to believe we got to start backing now, because if we don't, it can get out of hand. China got large investments coming in that region in the near future. They already signed a deal with Iran that's worth over $400 billion. That's nearly $500 billion. And I also heard reports that they want to sign multi-billion-dollar with Iraq, Afghanistan, of course the what you call that, the stands, Syria, because Syria, matter of fact, is in a hub of a transportation hub. It always was special for the past 2,000-3,000 years of trade because it connects Eurasia, Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, and Africa together. It from a logistical standpoint, it is a hub where things will go through with natural gas, petroleum, transportation with high-speed rail, air traffic. That's why Erdogan want to break it apart, because I think he want a piece of that because he know what's going on. So all that money will be going through Syria. Now you got this conflict in Israel, man. You got everybody starting to stand up around it. They got to. I mean, Israel got to just chill. They got to chill. They got to work with the Palestinians on a two-state solution. Hezbollah, I heard something that Hezbollah wanted to join in, but the only way they're gonna join in, if the Palestinians ask for help, and that's when they'll join in, and that's when it's gonna get much broader. With the new technologies that Syria is getting from Iran, because China freed up Iran with new technologies that China giving Iran, right? Which Russia don't have to risk their technology, right? Which is going to find itself in the hands of Hezbollah, which we all know that. You might see more casualties on the Israeli side if they go to war with Hezbollah. I don't want war. I don't want to see nobody die. No. So we need peace. I'm gonna have to back. I mean, the BDS movement is the only logical way to put pressure on Israel, where they can change their mind and they can come to the seats with the Hamas. With the Palestinian Authority, and they talk about the situation. My other two comments. Okay, man, I forgot the fourth one, but I'm gonna go on my third one. Maybe I can remember it. Okay. The guy was talking about Egypt and Ethiopia. Ethiopia, if they build that dam, Egypt will retaliate, but they're gonna do it in asymmetrical warfare. What they're gonna do is this. I saw something a month ago about these. I don't know if there was Egyptian journalists or council members or people part of the government. They were just talking out loud. It was filmed. It was type of meeting that should never been taped.
Tariff, I'm going to have to ask. I'm just going to have to go a moment because I'm just being called. But you carry on, and with Alex, and I'll be with you in just a very moment. Okay.
Okay.
So, okay. Carry on, Tariff.
All right, no problem. Okay. Now, Mr. Murcrus is gone. Now we can talk about women, Christopher. I'm just playing.
All right, let the fun begin. All right.
Yeah, let the fun begin. Mr. Serious Man left. I'm just playing.
Go on with Ethiopia. Go on with Ethiopia.
Okay. This is what I saw. I gotta look for it for y'all. If I can find it, I'm gonna send it to you. Man, these Egyptian, I don't know what they was, but they was just talking the most divide and conquer strategy. Like they say, this is what we should do. We should fund the separatists, the people the Wahhabis, the Salafists that's in Somalia. Because Ethiopia still got a conflict with Somalians, the Eritreans, right? The what's going on in southern Ethiopia with the Omo Valley, when you got the Oromia fighting against the Habesha forces, because the Habesha is Orthodox Christians, right? And the Habesha is so they got to deal with the Somalians, they got to deal with the southern Ethiopia with Oromia's at. They got to deal with the Eritreans, which is Catholic Christians. So it's bad for them. So if they build that dam, what Ethiopia have to do, they have to sit down with the Somalians, the Oromo people that went through. I mean, the Oromo people is hurt because some of the Oromo people used to be slaves underneath the Ethiopian rule some years ago, right? But anyway, they need to sit down with the Oromo people. They need to sit down with the Tigrian people and work out with some type of deal with them. And also, they got to include Tanzania, the Congo, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, all in that deal. They got to work together to show up their flank, because if not, Egypt is going to play these ethnic groups against Ethiopia for building that dam. And that's one way that they're going to most likely do it. As you see, they already got tensions going on in another northern Ethiopia dealing with the Tigray people, right? So Ethiopia got to be very careful. That's why I'm for nuclear power. If they can, if these countries that build nuclear power plants, if there wasn't so much sanction, then Ethiopia can build a nuclear power plant instead of a dam. Because if they build that dam, man, Ethiopia gonna get fractured again, just like the Djibouti, Eritrea, Somalia was taken away from them from ethnic strife 50 to 100 years ago. Is going to be fractured again, because this time it's going to be done by the Egyptians instead of the British and French or Italians. So, okay, my last one. I forgot it was important, but I'm gonna talk about Elon Musk, how he's manipulating the market with Dogecoin, Bitcoin, driving down the price of he's driving down the price of all Bitcoin so Dogecoin can compete and trying to get people to go in Dogecoin. But people, don't be stupid. He's driving it Bitcoin down so he can buy it at a lower price. That's all he's trying to do. So right now, for this, I mean, I guarantee you, within 6 months to a year, he's gonna start taking Bitcoin again for his cause. Okay, he's stopping payment of Bitcoin, but he's gonna start taking on payment again within a year or two, probably. He's trying to drive it down. He's manipulating the market, just like the people, the hedge funds, was manipulating the market against him, trying to ruin Tesla by shorting Tesla stock, right? So he's like your boy said, the abuser becomes the abuser. Like the person that was abused become the abuser. Now he's doing the same thing with the speculators was doing to him. He's becoming a speculator. He's trying to, mess with the markets. And I don't like, and also something else he said yesterday, I do not like. This is dangerous. He said, how about we start promoting those carbon tax credits? I'm like, oh man, I was already on a fence with him, but now oh man, my stomach started turning. Now he started promoting carbon credits. Okay, carbon credits is pure speculation, derivative, and it's BS. And also, it would be designed to use to keep Africa, Southeast Asia, Central and South America at third world standards. Because if you want to produce manufacturing, make your own cars, your own ships, have your own ports, that required foundries, steel mills, concrete factories, and all those things. And that do produce carbon. Okay, so what carbon tax is this? If your country want to produce so much of stuff, that means you're gonna have to pay into that carbon tax just to produce it. That would drive a country like Africa, that's already some parts of it already poor, more into bankruptcy. They would be held at a certain level where they can't improve themselves. If you break out of that, and don't listen to the carbon tax, then the countries will impose sanctions on you. Well, you won't be able to get certain type of technologies and certain type of materials to invest in your own nation, to build up your own nation. That's why the carbon tax cannot be passed. Who want to pass it? Ergo, Prince Charles. These people don't know what they actually know what it is. Like Grunberg, her name, she don't know what the carbon tax really is. It's basically it's going to put a invisible ceiling on developing nations from growing. They're gonna stay work. They're gonna stop and stay work where they at. You know, the best thing for nations to do is to have their own manufacturing, just like Rwanda want to do with the vaccine. They want to make their own mRNA vaccine. What is a good thing now? If your country make it, if the Greeks make it, because I got a question: would y'all trust a vaccine coming from Turkey? That's an mRNA vaccine. Hey, this is for y'all.
Tariff, we have to be very careful what we just say about these topics, because obviously it's sensitive again. Not a rule we have. But anyway, just to wrap up. I mean, I understand the point you're making about the Middle East, and it is extraordinarily difficult trying to get these people, as you put it, to chill. Well, if only it were that simple, I'm sorry to say. It's going to be very, very difficult to negotiate and persuade people who are so committed to their positions and have been for so long to dial down in any successful way. And in order to achieve that, what you need is an effective foreign policy vision to do it. And that's what our program is about today. We don't see any real sign of it. That's the problem. Now, with the Ethiopian Egyptian thing, you're quite right. And of course, Ethiopia itself is a very ancient state and society. It goes all the way back to the Roman era, but it's fragile. I mean, many nationalities have been brought together there. There's a war, which, heaven forbid, it could easily turn out extremely badly. And we would also see how the other African states would respond. By the way, Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, its capital, is the headquarters of the African Union. So it's an absolutely central part of Africa. Now, a central political part of Africa. So we would see how that would work out too. And your point about Syria being, the great linchpin of the commerce of the Middle East, that's also true. And it has been true, by the way, for thousands of years. And many people believe that one of the reasons why there was the war in Syria that we've experienced over these last few years is because there were hopes of breaking up Syria. Erdogan hoped Turkey would take parts of Syria, parts of the northern parts of Syria, which were particularly industrialized, cities like Aleppo. But there was also plans to use Syria to build pipelines from the Gulf across Syria to the sea, and that would have supposedly provided alternatives to Russian gas. So you have all of that in play in the Middle East as well. So you're absolutely right what you say about Syria. You're absolutely right what you say about Africa. We have to be extremely careful what we say on the medications and the pandemic, because our friends at YouTube don't like it. Let's not go there. Let's not go there.
Otherwise, this whole live stream will get pulled.
Absolutely. And Bitcoin and Elon Musk's activities.
Don't listen to Musk. Don't listen to Musk.
I'm going to say I think you're probably right. But I mean, again, it's not my field, but I think it makes perfect sense to me.
All right, Tarif, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say this. I'm pro-vaccine. All I was saying that countries should have the right to produce their own.
We understand.
We're not coming down pro, anti, nothing. We just the word.
It's
just the word. The word gets flagged by the algorithms, and then it all goes to hell.
Creates all kinds of problems. Exactly.
Yeah. So all right, Tarif, take care.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring in Alan. Alan, you with us?
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes, we can. How you doing?
Yeah. Great, terrific. I'll be brief. You suggested that this might happen if Trump lost the election. Is it much worse than you thought? That's the first thing. Secondly, and is this because of the way General Flynn was treated by the establishment during Trump's administration? And thirdly, do you think the US's main allies, say Japan, Britain, France, Israel, will start going their own way, especially Israel? And I feel that it's on the cards that Israel is going to do something very, very drastic to secure its own position in the Middle East. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Well, Alan, those are brilliant questions, and I'm afraid the answer to all of them is yes. If I can start with the first one, is it worse than I expected? Not only is it worse than I expected, the change, it's happening all much faster than I expected.
Yeah,
faster at every level. It's happening at turbo speed. I mean, foreign policy is coming apart at the wheels. Economic policy is off the planet. I mean, it's behaving more and more bizarrely than I could ever have imagined possible. And the administration itself looks completely dysfunctional. So yes is the answer. I mean, I can't put it more simply than that. I mean, I am astonished at how fast this has happened. I was expecting, actually, that there would be at least an appearance of stabilization. But this is the most bizarre and bizarrely disastrous start of any administration I have ever known. And I remember all the way back to Nixon, who was a very different administration, by the way. But I mean, so yes, absolutely, emphatically so. And on Flynn, well, we've discussed this many times on our programs. We believe, both of us believe, that the Trump administration lost direction when Flynn was removed, and it never found coherence in its foreign policy thereafter, because Donald Trump depended an awful lot on Flynn, both to help him, to protect him from the forces that were existed in Washington, and to provide structure to his foreign policy. So they went for Flynn, they got him out, they drove him to the point of, almost complete destruction. I mean, they did terrible things to the poor man, and it did create an incoherence in US policy under Trump, which has led directly to the mess that we see now. And they targeted him very, very carefully and very, very correctly. Now, I can't remember what the third one was, but to come to your fourth one about whether allies will start going their own directions, absolutely they will. And Israel, as you absolutely rightly say, is going to be amongst the first. Because obviously every country is now going to start saying to themselves, well, we can't depend on the US. We don't even know what their policies are from one day to the next. And we start having to take steps to look for our own protection and to secure our own interests. And in a place like the Middle East, a country like Israel has no alternative. Now, I think there was another point that you made, but I'm afraid I missed it.
You've covered it all basically with your last answer. Before I go, just one thing regarding Peter's comments earlier. The British military got a great deal of experience in this kind of thing in Northern Ireland in the 70s. And a book worth reading is a book by a serving military officer. I forget his name, but it's called Low Intensity Operations. And it became a handbook for various militaries on how to deal with situations like Palestine, like Northern Ireland, etc., etc. Worth reading. Thanks very much, guys. Love it.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan. Take care. Okay, great. Let's keep on moving along. We've got Simon, and we got David, James, Common Sense, and Booba. We'll wrap it up there. Let's bring in Simon. Simon, how you doing?
I'm doing well, guys. Very interesting conversation. I'd just like to respond to what Dr. Bill said about the UK. I think to understand the UK, you have to understand that it's pretty much most of its institutions are run by people selected from a very small number of families, perhaps several thousand families that go through, attend public school, which is a misnomer because they're fee-paying schools, and then go on to Oxford and Cambridge. So these people form the true elites of the UK, much the same way as there are particular lycées in France that people attend. So I kind of wish the British deep state had as much power as Dr. Bill was saying, because I think we might be in a better position. One thing you both might not be aware of, did you realize that the Greek military is supporting Saudi Arabia?
No, I didn't. I wasn't aware of that at all. That is news to me. Perhaps you could.
On the 21st of April, the Greeks sent a Patriot battery along with 40 Greek soldiers to Mana, to Saudi Arabia. The source from that is a website which I would highly recommend everybody read, because so many of the topics that have been mentioned today have been flagged up in there, and that's thestrategypage.com. For instance, they also mentioned about the secret talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they also have excellent coverage of what's going on in Africa and elsewhere. And they're always far ahead of the pack in terms of the information they provide compared to mainstream media. So I really recommend people have a look at that.
Can you provide that address again? Can you say that address one more time?
It's literally strategypage, all one word, .com.
Okay,
I highly recommend. I literally look at it every day, because there's usually 1 or 2 new articles put up there every day. And it's always fact-based information. And I mean, I'm an FT reader, and I haven't seen anything in the FT about any talks between Saudi and Iran. But they have excellent sources on it, so I'd highly recommend it. And they've also talked about things like the Ethiopian dam project, which, for everybody's interest, Ethiopia's already done a deal with Sudan to provide them free electricity from it. Which will make the challenge, if the Egyptians want to take any military action, much more difficult.
Absolutely.
The other thing I'd recommend as well, before I get to any questions, is we live in tumultuous times, and it's nice to be able to unwind a little. And I think we're in similar times to the sort of 1900s. And I don't know if either of you have ever seen the TV series Sidney Riley, Ace of Spies.
Absolutely, I remember it when it came out. I watched it then. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And to be honest, I think it portrays the world in a much more realistic way, where, for all the politics and political doctrine and ethnic hatreds, so many of the issues that arise in the world arise because of money. And because of, the desire for access to resources. So I was just wanting to say, if anyone wants a break and to look at perhaps a gentler time, that they really watch that. With respect to the subject of today's video, I think we should also consider the domestic circumstances that the Biden administration is operating in. I've been following as many of the different financial aspects as I can. And the number of stories that I'm seeing of real food and resource shortages in the US is really shocking. I was watching a YouTube video yesterday of someone who was literally trying to buy a new car in the US. He's living in Florida. He went round a dozen car dealerships. And the earliest he could get a new car was 4 months. That was the earliest period in which they would commit to delivering. And then they were saying, but the typical time was 6 months. And then you also have the issue of the payments being made to unemployed workers, where they're averaging between $32,000 and $35,000 a year. Which is far above minimum wage, which means that the US economy is working at far from its peak capacity. And therefore, this is accentuating the inflation issue in the US. as well as leading to the next stage of inflation, which is a increase in wages. So signing on bonuses are being offered. People are being paid to come in for interviews. McDonald's is offering $50 for someone who'll just come in through an interview. And I think that you have to put the foreign policy paralysis of the Biden administration in that context. And I wonder what you think about that, whether what we're seeing may actually get worse in terms of them not keeping their eye on the ball.
Simon, you're absolutely right. You are completely right about this. Everything is connected. The economic situation and the foreign policy situation and the inability to adjust to things that are happening are completely connected. I mean, the reason why we have this economic policy, well, first of all, there is a kind of ideology. There is definitely an ideological drive there to try to do as much as possible and to do it in a certain way and to introduce, the big state back and do it with the vengeance. Obviously, there's that element, but there's also a huge element of inertia. There's all these various factions that exist in the United States and within the Democratic Party itself, which all have their particular desires and agendas. And now they've been given an access to a limitless printing pot, if you like, whatever you want to call it. And they are demanding their share, and they are going to resist furiously any attempt to rein this back. And it's just the same way that you have with foreign policy. You have a weak administration that is losing control of the whole situation, both domestically and externally. And at the same time as that's happening, one also senses that there isn't any real desire, because they almost want it to continue in that kind of way. So I think you're absolutely right. These things are intimately connected with each other, and it is very alarming when you hear about shortages starting in the United States and people not working because they're not really incentivized to work anymore because of the amount of money they're getting. It is a classic inflation scenario. You have capacity constraints building up and bottlenecks building up right across the economy, and you have a situation where there is more money moving around than there are goods to back it. And I'm just astonished only at the speed with which this has happened. I never expected it to happen as fast as this, either domestically or in foreign policy terms. And eventually, if you have a crisis in the domestic economy, you're absolutely right, that will draw all the attention away from foreign policy, to the extent that there's any attention there anyway.
I think that's true, and I think there's another factor that's working in this mix, and that's the fact that the national coverage of these shortages is virtually non-existent. All of these stories that I've seen mentioned and referenced by sources have been local stories.
Yes.
Local TV or local press. And I wonder how, I would ask you both, do you think that is a consequence of the mainstream media's efforts to support Biden so openly, and that they may be having, I won't swear, but an OS moment, thinking that they've committed an absolute act of folly, and now they have no choice but to cover up Biden's mistakes?
I think it's both. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the one doesn't exclude the other. They still want to support this administration and this president to every extreme way that they possibly can. And at the same time, they're becoming increasingly nervous and worried. And that means that they need to bury the bad news, in part probably to reassure themselves.
Well, I think that's definitely true, but I do also think that, I mean, there are other things that are ongoing that I won't mention, because I don't want you guys to get strike in terms of Arizona specifically. But the other thing that you mentioned, and I think this is really true, is that allies are starting to look elsewhere. I know there's already been talks between Australia and Japan with respect to Taiwan. And I think you may have seen that China reacted very strongly to these potential discussions where they were suggesting that they might try and intervene if there was any effort on the part of China to take back Taiwan. And as we've already mentioned, you know, the fact that Saudi Arabia is in talks with Iran shows that the American alliance system is starting to break down. As one of your first callers mentioned for New Zealand and the Five Eyes, and that's the inner core of the US strategic alliance. And as you say, what normally it would have taken place over a decade is literally taking place over weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is just astonishing to see, and you're quite right. And you're going to see that happening with more and more countries. Britain will follow. Britain will do the same. I get the sense that the British increasingly are becoming increasingly nervous about this administration. Like a lot of other governments, a lot of countries, they welcomed the change of administration. I think they thought that this was going to be a more predictable and stable arrangement, and they've discovered otherwise. And the Germans, I know for a fact, are deeply disappointed and extremely concerned.
Well, I think that's true, and I think Britain's already taken steps in that area, hasn't it? I mean, the increasing the number of nuclear warheads on our at-sea deterrent was a major step. And I mean, it did get some coverage at the time, but I was really quite surprised that did not get more coverage, because the UK has always been in the forefront of anti-proliferation efforts and to restrict the size of its nuclear arsenal. And in fact, that puts us on a par with China almost in terms of number of actual warheads. But I also think that the fact that we're sending our carrier task force for a world tour, which is also going to include the South China Seas, is indicative of that. I would not be surprised, and again, I'd ask for your opinion on this, Alexander. Would you be surprised if Britain offered to base troops and aircraft in Australia as part of a closer economic and military ties?
I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. I mean, it's happened before, so it might happen again. I'm not sure that the Australians will want it to happen, but you know, it wouldn't surprise me. It's entirely conceivable. But more and more countries, as you rightly say, are going to start making their own arrangements because they will have no choice. And some of those countries will say, well, we have to make our deals with the other side, which is what Saudi Arabia and Iran appear to be doing. And other countries will say, well, without the United States, we have to make our own security arrangements with our long-standing friends. And that might be what the British and the Australians do. After all, Britain and Australia are very close and will continue to be.
I mean, I think that's true. And I have to say, I would sooner see Britain make a military commitment to defend Australia and New Zealand than to defend Latvia, Estonia, and Eastern Europe, because Russia is not a military threat to the United Kingdom other than its nuclear weapons. And given the behavior, I mean, I never thought this would come, but given the behavior of the EU during Brexit and afterwards, I think there would be a lot of people in favor of such change. And given the recent election results, you know, a Tory party might be emboldened to think, you know what, maybe this NATO membership, because to be frank, the forces that are being deployed in those areas are tripwire forces. They would not stop a genuine Russian assault. So why have them there? Why take the risk? Why commit yourself to a war which you have no national interest? There's no benefit to the UK of being a member of NATO anymore. And especially now, the NATO the only real NATO mission is winding down in Afghanistan.
That's entirely correct. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, trying to defend the Baltics is not going to be a popular policy in Britain if it ever comes to it. And the forces that can be deployed there are far too limited. Scott Ritter, by the way, has written very well about this. You know, he's the former US Marine intelligence officer, and he's actually looked at the forces that are defending the Baltics. And he's made exactly the point that you've just made. It's a tripwire force which realistically cannot function to defend the Baltics by itself, and the idea that it can be reinforced at any proximate time period is unrealistic anyway. So why make that commitment? Whereas Australia is defendable. It can defend
exactly, and Scott Ritter is actually he's an excellent military theorist. I read a piece he wrote about the use of drones in warfare, which was incredibly informative.
Yeah.
But the fact is that the situation in the Baltics is, if Russia does want to take those countries, it will.
Yeah.
No conceivable NATO forces deployed there prior to that will stop them.
Yes.
That means that you have to have forced entry, which means you have to do an amphibious assault to retake those countries. You can't do that on Russia's backyard.
No.
Even with a full-scale American commitment, that would be extremely risky. And I wouldn't give it more than a 50% chance of success. So why involve yourself in that commitment? To be frank, I kind of hope that the British government starts taking a more realistic attitude, and realizing the new world that we're living in, and that what we need to do is concentrate on our most loyal allies, which has never been Europe ever, and also be more practical about the military commitments we make, given the amount we're spending on defense. I mean, the one other area I would ask people to look at is what China is doing during all of this. And what I have noticed is that China is dramatically increasing its oil and food imports. In fact, it's increased its imports of US corn by 10 times over the last few months. And that I do think that what we are seeing are the early stages of preparation for a possible Taiwan intervention, probably not in 2021, but in 2022, probably sort of this time next year, because I've been quite shocked by, not just in terms of food resources, but also in terms of oil and mineral resources, the imports that China's been making. And this is not getting covered in the mainstream media. If you want to see it, you have to go and look in the specialist publications that cover those areas.
Yes, I would say, and this is just to finish on that point, I have also, on a somewhat less alarming perspective of Chinese intentions. The Chinese read the economic figures, and they may be buying grain and oil now because they don't want to pay more for them later, because the rate at which prices are rising is just astonishing. I mean, we could very easily be looking at $100 oil sometime next year, I think.
I think that's also a possibility, and I think also, why wouldn't you be spending your US dollar foreign exchange reserves now, while they're still worth something, when they might be worth 20 or 30% less this time next year? So that's another possibility as well. We live in interesting times, gentlemen.
We certainly do, Simon.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Simon. Have a great weekend. All right, we're going to bring in David. And then we'll bring in Zariel has a quick comment question. Then we'll bring in James after that. David, how you doing?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Nice. I hope you guys. Oh man, I gotta tell you. First off, I want to apologize. I found another use for my tinfoil hat, since I've got this wonderful Duran hat. I'm told for today, 10% off if you use the code word REALNEWS, all one word. It seems as though some of the previous callers that glammed on before I did shot down all of my other questions, but Alex had a good, at the beginning when you all first started out, we were projecting potential hotspots that are going to crop up after this Israeli and the Middle East going into full boil. And Nixon keeps coming up. And what makes me wonder is, okay, we're a year and a half from the midterms. Okay, that's going to be a bloodbath. Okay, maybe even the Senate goes. You have more and more states like Texas and whatnot that are talking seceding from the Union and whatnot like that. So when you're in a midterm and plus you're throwing in all of this potential for election fraud by rewriting federal elections, I mean, what are you going to end up with? Is there a point when the powers that are backing this clown show say, hey, man, you know, there's a no confidence vote here in both houses of the government. What are we going to do? Because it kind of looks like if they don't do something and bring in like a Gerald Ford, where are we going to be?
Well, that's a good question, because who is the Gerald Ford? I mean,
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris doesn't. I mean, you know, I remember Gerald Ford. I mean, he was an amiable.
Well, no, Alexander. But Alexander, you have to remember the vice president and Nixon did not step into the House.
No.
It's not so because they got enough on her too. She's a non-issue. She's part of the same show in the same car.
No. Anyway, we'll see how it turns out. But I think that the midterms in 2022 are going to be incredibly interesting. And if we have a major crisis in the economy, which is looking more likely, it seems to me, by the day, then I think we could very well see a landslide in 2022. And then all kinds of possibilities, interesting possibilities, start to become real. Because, of course, we'll see exactly what the Republicans, assuming they win that landslide, do with it. If they dither, if they sort of follow the sort of Liz Cheney, Mitch McConnell style of politics, well, it won't amount to very much. But on the other hand, it seems to me that things are shifting there in the party also, and then we will see. 2022 is going to be a very important year. That's my view, anyway. Further down the line, I mean, I think you were talking or hinting at secession and things of that kind. I think my own sense is that most Americans are still very committed to their nation and to their country and will not want to see that happen. But of course, if you have a prolonged political crisis over many, many years in the United States, then of course people do start to think of those alternatives. I don't think we're there yet.
Well, I know it's coming close because when you hear it being brought up, you know, it's more than just a low rumble. It's more than just a few peasants on the row, you know, or idle talk in the pub. So because I mean, once that straw breaks the camel's back, there's not enough Bondo to put it back together.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I mean, if we get into that kind of scenario, in that situation, then as I said, it's not going to be like the 1860s. It's going to be completely different this time. I mean, it's going to have a completely different reasons and things. But as I said, I haven't been to the US for a while. I haven't been to around the States. I mean, I don't have my finger on the pulse in that kind of way to sense what's going on. And of course, the media doesn't really talk about it. So my instinct tells me that we're not quite there yet. But if things go very badly wrong, I'm not saying that's not going to happen. It might very well do. You know, we'll see.
The temperature in the lumberyard conversations, because anytime somebody stops, next thing you know, you got 5 or 6 people gathered up, and it's not good for the current administration. I mean, and you can push too far.
No, you can't. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for everything, Alex and Alexander.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Take care. Have a great weekend. All right, we're going to bring in Zariel, then James. Zariel.
Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening, Zariel.
How are you?
We're doing great. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you for adding me very, very quickly into the chat. My question, or maybe just a quick line before. We haven't mentioned this discussion this afternoon. The Colonial Pipeline was hacked allegedly again by a Russian hacker team. So Russian interference again. We have the same story. $5 million US dollars was paid as a ransom. My question would be, or questions maybe, how did they pay for it? Exactly. I'd like to really know, how is a payment like this made? You can't just make a wire transfer to whoever. And if you did, it would be able to be tracked very easily. So, you know, did they hand over a briefcase? Did they meet someone? Who knows? And does this mean that the U.S. government now is officially negotiating with terrorists or funding terrorism? If we to form the question in a different manner. Or is this a pseudo transfer of you know, a dark budget, you know, shoving it from one agency to the next, maybe financing their own, let's say, false flag?
Well, can I just say, first of all, Zariel, you've raised many important points. I've actually done a program about this. Allegedly, and of course, it's not been confirmed, as I understand it, that there was a payment, but everybody believes there was, and the figure of $5 million is mentioned. As I understand it, that payment was made by cryptocurrencies, which are supposedly untraceable. I'm not sure of the exact mechanism that was used to do it. And clearly, this was a criminal operation, and I cannot imagine that the Russians had any role in it at all. But that's the story that we've been told. Now, it is a disastrous precedent. It is an appalling thing for the United States or the contractor that runs this pipeline to be paying ransom payments to keep critical US infrastructure running. I cannot imagine a worse thing from a, you know, security point of view. I mean, it's the sort of thing now. I mean, you're going to have hacking groups all around the world. They're going to be saying, oh, look, this is a quick way to make money. I mean, so it's a disastrous idea. Now, I cannot believe that the US, with its enormous intelligence operations, if it were to work together with other countries around the world, could not quickly track down these people, bring them to justice, and get on top of this thing. But that requires an element of international cooperation, which we are not seeing. That's the first thing. And secondly, of course, it probably needs agreements about how to deal with cybercrime and cyber treaty, cyber warfare on an international basis, which up to now the US has been resisting. So these points which you're making are entirely valid. They're excellent ones. Negotiating with criminals who are arguably terrorists, because this is a terroristic thing, and payments of ransoms in this respect is just appalling. I mean, it's deeply shocking. It was not the Russians, and one hopes that something is done to bring these people to justice, and done fast.
Thank you very much for the answer, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Zariel. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. I'm going to bring in James. Actually, Alexander, I heard that Biden made a payment to these guys with Dogecoin.
Wow. Okay.
He paid them in Doge.
But
I don't know. The whole thing smells fishy to me.
Well.
That's what my gut is telling me.
Well. Kaspersky, who is this, antivirus wizard in Russia who runs the Kaspersky lab, has come up with all sorts of theories involving the CIA. What do I know?
The whole thing smells fishy.
Yeah.
No, Biden. I don't think Biden knows what Doge is. I don't think he knows what Bitcoin is.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, he's probably not progressed beyond checks after all.
Oh boy! All right, good one. The whole thing does smell fishy, though. Something's not right. Anyway, let's bring in James. James, how you doing?
Good evening, you two. Is the weather better where you are? It's cloudy here in southeast London.
It's super hot here.
Yeah,
lucky you. I'll switch.
It's pretty cloudy here in North London too, actually.
Right. A couple of points when I've got a main question, if I may. Thanks very much for the recommendation on the Scott Ritter article. I'm not sure whether or not I would agree 100% with the phrase NATO can't defend NATO, but he does raise some very valid points. On that note, with respect to Simon talking about the Baltics, I think one source, South Front, they said it was part of Russia's conventional deterrence posture. They could overrun the Baltics in, I think, 3 days, paralyze them in a matter of 12 hours or less. So, yeah, the military situation is very much heavily weighted towards Russia in that particular area. Also, ironically enough, after discussing last time how people view other people, I got into an argument the very next day about a certain incident that happened in Salisbury involving a certain chemical we're not allowed to name. So rather apt, shall we say. But my main question today is, are you guys aware of what's going on in Canada? I put a question in the chat in case I couldn't get onto the call. But my brother's over there in Canada. He's at university there. And primarily through Rebel News, but through quite a few other sources, some of the stuff that's going on in Canada is frankly horrific to the extent that it's not called you can't call it a free country anymore. You've got secret warrants, persecution of the church. You've got there's a new bill trying to be passed in Alberta, I believe, that basically makes protests illegal, so you can't protest the government. There was there's what appears to be the police in Montreal taking hostages in one case when it came to Rebel News, and also increased picking on the Jewish community in Montreal, just to name a few. So are you guys aware of that?
Some of it indeed, because we do follow Canadian news considerably, and you're absolutely right, it is horrific and very, very troubling. And of course, especially so, again, because Canada was a country which I always conceived of as having an extremely creative and positive foreign policy, and having an excellent domestic situation. I mean, it is really extraordinary to see how completely all that's been turned round by an administration, the Justin Trudeau administration, which, well, to be straightforward about it, well, maybe I won't be so straightforward about it, because if I say what I think about Justin Trudeau, I'm sure I'm going to get into trouble with our friends at YouTube. But I mean, it's in that respect, it doesn't surprise me. It does surprise me and concern me that there's been less pushback in Canada than I might have expected.
Has would you know if there's been like any mention of this in other world news? If I may take an anecdote, for example, in 2019, I got the chance to visit St. Petersburg. Beautiful city, recommend everyone else goes there. I made a friend there who's at SPGU, the St. Petersburg State University, and he's studying politics, and I help him out with his English from VK. And I remember him telling me he wanted to become a diplomat and be posted towards a country like Canada, because he said you don't really get scandals over there. And yeah, I have to say, I did burst out laughing and then listed off 10 that happened within the last 5 years. And I keep sending him these articles, such as in England, for example, back in the UK, there was a woman who was arrested for taking her kids on the beach, and she was fined under these COVID laws. So what is the rest of the world aware of what's going on?
No, I don't think they're very aware. I mean, there is some talk about it, but basically, Canada is one of those countries which is just below the radar, unfortunately, because it's actually a very important country. But because it's North America, it shares North America with the United States. It gets overshadowed by the United States. And I think a lot of what is going on there is not particularly well known. And the media in the United States and Britain doesn't cover it. That's exactly the point. So they don't know about it. And if you talk about Russians, by the way, I mean, Russians have long had very, very optimistic opinions about Canada. I mean, I've met Russians who at one time in the early 2000s were thinking of emigrating there. So, I mean, you know, a lot of people still have a positive view of Canada based on how it was, not how it is, and they don't know about it because the media doesn't cover it to anything like the extent that they should do.
Okay, well, thank you very much then. Keep it quick because we're already approaching 3 hours. Shall we expect a full video then on Canada at some point?
Oh, absolutely, definitely. And we've done quite a few videos on Canada in the past, but you know, we haven't done one for a while, so definitely
we've done many. I've actually did a video on the C10, the bill C10. I believe it's the hate speech bill as well.
Yeah.
Is that the one which he also wants to push through the YouTube censorship laws?
Yeah. It's the all-encompassing hate speech, discrimination, online protection bill that Trudeau is pushing through.
It's getting ridiculous. I've got Canadian citizenship.
It's already been pushed through, actually.
Yeah. And what's been going on in the last 12 months is possibly the strongest argument that I've ever come close to wanting to renounce my Canadian citizenship.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's like, I have very good memories of Ottawa, especially because that's where my mum's side of the family came from. The people there were always lovely. I mean, Parliament Hill in Canada, if you've ever been, it looks a little bit like Hogwarts. It's actually quite picturesque. But it's just, it brings you almost wanting to cry to a certain extent, just to see what was a country built on British principles and almost a hold up for democracy to be almost destroyed in the way it's currently been.
That's the point.
That's
the point, James. Take Canada down first. Canada's the test case. And then, of course, you have a Justin Trudeau. Let's not forget that Justin Trudeau was part of what I call the Rat Pack, the neoliberal Rat Pack. We talked about the neoliberals
he
earlier
does
in the
seem
show.
to be hanging on by a while.
Merkel, Trudeau. Remember those guys? Obama, Merkel, Trudeau, Renzi, Cameron, Hollande, you know.
Well, thank you very much again. I'll bid you good evening and let the next person talk.
Thank you, James. Take care.
Take care, you too.
Okay, let's see. We've got 3 more callers here. We got Common Sense, Bubba and Bobio. Let's bring Common Sense into the stream, and we'll get to super chats and wrap up this live stream. Common Sense.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
I'm great. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. I have lost my job last week, but I'm still great.
Sorry, very sorry to hear that.
Yeah, well, it's okay because I can really quickly find another one. Basically, what I want to talk today, I have one point and several questions. I will try to be as quick as I can with my point. My point is about economy, the modern understanding of economy. How do we see it right now? Because I think that the big bulk of the problems which we have with the world today, it's from inappropriate use of the terms. Because now how we use term economy, it's simply don't right. What do you mostly imagine when you say word economy? Yes, it's manufacturing capacity of the country, it's well-being of the people of the country, it's their finances. Yes, it's how the people can how many people can buy goods and services in this country. Yes, and what do you, if you ask some random person about economy? Yes, the overwhelming majority of people who even will give you some answer will say about the GDP. So in modern understanding of the economy, GDP equals economy. And I think it's wrong on the very, very many levels. I will explain why. Basically, what is GDP even indicating? Is it indicating the manufacturing capacity of the country? No, it doesn't. Does it indicate the living standard of the people in the country? No, it doesn't. GDP, living standards can drop and GDP can rise. Yes. What does it indicate? It's do not indicate anything of value. And I think that this understanding in the heads of the people in the world, GDP equals economy, it's really, really wrong. Yes, Alexander?
No, I'm listening, and I'm completely in agreement with you. I think GDP is a completely artificial metric. It's used all the time. It's used by everybody, and I use it myself when I discuss economics because we don't really have an alternative. But I don't think it is a useful or reliable measure at all. I think it's one which has become increasingly outdated also because the way in which economies have evolved with financialization, with monetary growth, with all of these things have made it extraordinarily difficult to measure GDP. And, that's, I hear what you say. I agree with you completely. We don't have anything else at the moment. That's the trouble.
My point is the economists, so-called, God knows why they called economists, because they are not economists. They are financists in the best case scenario. Basically, they are pushing to increase GDP of the country. Yes, and this is seen as a common goal for all these people, and they yell, "Look at us! We have this much GDP. Our economy is great." It's not great. I make myself a question, just like you. What metric can you look upon to see actual state of affairs in this field? And I discovered that the closest you can get to understand the actual state of things in the quote-unquote economy is to look at the energy consumption of the country. Because basically you cannot do anything without energy. Even our live stream today is all powered by energy. Electricity, carbon fuel, burning energy, etc., etc. So if you will distinguish the country by consumption of the energy and energy per capita, you basically can understand how developed the country is. So for all people who are now listening me, I recommend to do this research, and you will see a whole lot of another world. Yes, basically this, and my point is we should stop to use inappropriate terms. Another thing you taught today about is term cultural Marxism, which is as far as from Marxism as it could be. And basically it have some loose connection with the Marxism, because modern neoliberals, as far as I could understand, they are all derived from the old school of Trotskyists. The third or fourth internationals, if I remember correctly, which Trotsky have established when he was expelled from the Soviet Union. The bulk of the modern neoliberals is actually Trotskyists from that era. Their roots are there. That's how they are connected to Marx, but it's really, really loose connection, in fact. And what a couple of questions I want to ask you about. It's about Russia. First of all, I want to ask: do you know that recently Russia have expelled 10 U.S. diplomats, including the press secretary of the U.S. embassy? And how do you think what will be the next steps? Because from my understanding, this last action was kind of first time it was kind of preemptive from Russia. Yes, it was usually it was some US action and then Russian reaction. Yes, this time it was slightly different. Yeah.
It's not slightly different. It was profoundly different. They threw out the first secretary, they threw out diplomats, and they basically forced the ambassador to leave. And then they imposed restrictions on how far US diplomats in Russia can travel. And then they withdrew all the local staff, locally recruited staff who serviced the embassy, meaning that, you know, this diminished core of US officials who are left in the embassy are going to have to deal with all the menial tasks as well. And then they've said that they're going to unroll a list of unfriendly countries, which is all the major NATO countries, which will face the same restrictions, so that the sort of things that the US was doing it and now can't do through its own embassy, it won't be able to do by getting the embassies of friendly countries to do it for them in Moscow. This is a radical action. This is something that is, you know, on a scale that the Russians have not done before. They carried out a major expulsion of US embassy staff back in 2017. And now they followed this up with this extremely tough step. And it's left the US embassy and the US diplomatic presence in Russia at an almost ephemeral level, to an extent that has not been true since diplomatic relations were established between the two countries in the early 30s. So this is a huge step. It's not been widely publicized in the West. I don't think it's even fully understood in Russia. But those of us who, you know, are aware of how embassies work. Alex, by the way, comes from a diplomatic family. His father was an ambassador. My family, well, we're not quite in that way. We weren't in diplomacy, but my father did some diplomacy. People like us understand very well what the impact of these kind of actions on an embassy and on the country that has that embassy, its ability to conduct diplomatic relations. We understand what that means.
Yes, it was for me. It was astonishing move from the Russians. I didn't expect this.
No.
Yes.
Nor did the Americans, nor did the Western powers. I mean, they are spooked by it. The European Union has made a statement absolutely condemning this move to make, you know, to declare European states unfriendly, and saying, you know, that if any one state is declared unfriendly, then that, you know, all of them will stand together or fall together if you prefer. But that's what they're going to do. So they are very spooked by it. They're extremely alarmed by this development, and they're waiting with great anxiety to see what this list of unfriendly countries amounts to.
Yes. This list of unfriendly countries for Russia, it's pretty much new thing to do. Even this type of game when they are proactive, but I consider it's as a logical move. Next logical move, it's in Putin's strategy. I will explain how I see Putin's strategy. The most important thing that Putin make in Russia through all these years, one of his most important tasks was to domesticate the Russian elite. What I'm saying, because previously Russian elite was really connected to the West. It goes down even to the 16th century. It's so far. And when the Russian elite was considering their retirement, so to speak, they are considering in most cases the retirement in the West. They are considering the place where to hold their money in the West. And in Putin's view, it was really devastating for the country. And it's actually so. So what Putin made recently, for one, he even make some couple of offshore destinations inside the Russia. It's one thing, but mostly he proposed any support Russian state can give you if you exercise your activities abroad. You can have military support, you can have Russian mercenaries. If you have some economic interest abroad, you can do this, do whatever you want, as long as your activities stays abroad, not in the Russian side. And this way he decreased the amount of pressure in Russia inside and increased Russian influence. The second thing which Putin have clearly in mind, the American, US media and European media, Western media, they say that Putin uses gaining influence, etc., etc., etc. But how? How he gain influence? I didn't see any Western media are talking about this. I am talking about Russian nuclear power plants building around the world. You should understand why this is important. Nuclear power plant, it's actually not as a facility which you can simply dismantle. It's not the facility which you can simply give maintenance of these facilities to somebody else, or make this maintenance by yourself. It's not like that. If you have Russian nuclear power plant, modern nuclear power plant inside your country, you already have 100% point of the influence of the Russia, and this point of the influence, it will be not perpetual, but close to this for next 30, 40 years. And each country which have nuclear power plants from Russia, they have Russian specialists up there on the ground. They have they already have perpetual ties with Russia, no matter what. And this is another point which is widely overlooked in Western media, but it's actually working. And if you will look at the amount of nuclear power plants Russia is building right now, you will be astonished.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. I mean, one of the hidden stories of the whole Czech business, the Czech expulsions and all that, was to stop Russia tendering for the construction of a nuclear power plant in the Czech Republic. That was seen by many people in the West as extremely threatening to Western influence in the Czech Republic, where, by the way, opinion is finely balanced. I've been to Prague quite a lot recently, and I find that an awful lot of people in the Czech Republic would actually quite favor good relations with Russia. It's a country with which the Czechs have historically had close relations, and building a nuclear power plant there from Russia would obviously add to all of that, and that's something that some people don't want to see.
Yes, it is true, and this all means Russian economy, for example. Yes, what I'm talking about. The West is really good at deterring Russian economy and Russian export, except crude materials. It's for example, when the Russians started to import their airplanes, many of the Western companies, which was initially eager to buy these airplanes, canceled their orders for these airplanes because of the political reasons. In the US, I know about the fact that when Russia built for some university two supercomputers, Russian company, this university was condemned, and
I can't remember its name. It was sanctioned. It was actually sanctioned.
And many people told always that Russians should have more diversified export, but they can't. They simply can't do this because any export that they have developing, which is highly technological, it's always cut down in the consumption market in the West. And this is the reason why Russians are come with all these extraordinary ways to bypass these ties on the Russian economy. And the third point I want to make is also about Russia, and it's about the division of labor in the future world. how I see once again Russian strategy, because well, I'm mostly familiar with Russia, given my geographical location. It is in close proximity to me, and for a long time was my the point of my interest. Russian history, Russian culture, etc. How do Russia see itself in the future? It sees itself as the energy hub of the world. And when I tell energy, I tell all kinds of energy. If you need energy supply, you go to Russia. If you need gas supply, you go to Russia. If you need fuel supply, you go to Russia. If you need nuclear power plant on your ground, you go to Russia. If you anything that is connected to the energy, you go to Russia. And that's why it's so eager now to forge its ties with China, even to the greater extent now, because right now the Russians have secured their energy dominance as they understand it for the future, because now they understand that they have energy edge over the China, and China will not be able to close this gap between them in this field, and that's why they will be always from now on, for conceivable time, they will be equal partner. They will have some advantage. In my thoughts, basically this is all what I wanted to tell. Thank you for your attention. If you have some questions about Ukraine, about situation about here, I can answer.
Well, well, first of all, thank you, Sergey. And where are you, by the way? Are you based in Russia or in Ukraine?
No, in Ukraine, Kiev. Yes.
Ukraine. Well, I would have lots of questions, but perhaps the best way to do it, I mean, I'd love to know all about the Medvedchuk situation, for example, but perhaps the better way to do that, rather than take up time now, would be if you could contact us, and then maybe we can have an interchange, because obviously having somebody in Ukraine would be very, very interesting.
Of course, basically this situation in Ukraine, it had really long development. I remember from my school days. We have had all our books, old Soviet books, for math, for literature, for everything. But we have brand new printed history books. And it all was printed by the foundation Vidrodzenia. I don't know how to tell it in English. Resurrection, I suppose. Yes, it's US-based NGO, which was printing these books even in 90s in the Ukraine. So it's all of this story. It's started in Ukraine way back in the 90s and earlier. Basically, all of my interest in Russia was because that I considered information in these history books which I received in my school days in Ukrainian school was illogical, and I wanted to find out what actually was happening, and that was the starting point of all my interest in Russian history and Russian culture.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sergey.
Thank you, Sergey.
Fascinating.
Alexander, was great honor to talk with you guys, and have a nice day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Take care.
All right, let's bring in Bubba and Bomio, and we'll wrap it up with super chats. Bubba, you're on. Bubba, are you with us? Bubba going once. Bubba going twice. Sold. Bubba is MIA. Let's bring in Bomio. Bomio, you with us?
Yes. Good afternoon.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Good afternoon. Mr. Alexander, you made a program on the issue of international rule-based order, and I want to share a statement or a comment on that. If it comes to that, the West has really created a political suicide with a concept of international rule-based order. I am going to share a phrase that you will start to hear more about in about 3 years' time. And that phrase or statement is the collective Africans rule-based order, applicable only to Africans worldwide. Take a moment, think about that, and see in which direction it will take our world. Yeah. Most people forget that between the Second World War and the 1960s, most people say that Africans got independence, but most people also forget that, the Africans changed the total political structure of the day. They threw out the colonial masters, got independence, and established themselves. The disbelief of what the political path that the West has taken compared to what they used to tell us, the Africans, and what they are saying now, the belief is unbelievable. And I wouldn't say much more about what I just told you guys, but there are some big monumental changes on the ground, and it doesn't look pretty.
No, I agree.
It doesn't look pretty, and a set of things that the West has created really it has shifted the ground. Yeah. So that is what I wanted to share.
Excellent. Right. Gosh.
Thank you, Romeo.
Thank you, Romeo. That's very, very interesting. Yes.
Thanks. Nice weekend.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Okay, Alexandre, real quick, we'll bring you in, and then we'll get to super chats. Alexandre, are you with us?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Listen, okay, I got 50 questions, 7 hours of monologue, and then we're gonna. Okay. All right, I just want to say I love you guys. You guys really need to take a break. Like, holy crap, Alex, you are fizzling out. I can tell. So yeah, make sure. Yeah, I'm just saying, cut them off sometimes. It's fine, It's boom. It's fine. So yeah,
Alexandre,
really
you were talking up Monero in the chat. I saw.
Yeah, no, because that's the only possible. Like at Monero, there's probably like another coin I can't really think of to the top of my mind that would probably allow these hackers to have like a privacy-enabled currency exchange between the U.S. government and them. The other thing, just a quick thing, in terms of like the hacking, we're going to get a lot more hackers coming from the ex-Soviet states, especially. I mean, these are usually people who have high mathematical ability because of the Soviet schools. Technical knowledge is very easy to get by, and all they have to do is it's free. It's free. Like the knowledge to hack, to do all this kind of stuff is free. It's out there, especially on Russian sites. So, I mean, this is just going to get more and more prevalent because it's for them, it's a lot easier than it is for people who don't know math. So yeah, this is just going to be a new normal. Yeah, welcome to the new world. So anyways, you guys have fun. So yeah, that's it. See you guys. Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, great call. All right, Alexandra, let's I see Zahir over here, but one sec. Okay. let's oh boy. Let's go to the super chat to wrap it up. From Anatoly Zuperin, 179 rubles, super sticker. Thank you very much, Anatoly. From English Loyalist, what good is the UN now? Wasn't that supposed to be our concert of Europe?
Well, indeed, it was. I mean, that's a very good point, actually. I mean, Sakwa, who, as I said, is the person who wrote that article, I mean, accepts, in fact, he founds his idea of a concert on the basis of the UN. The UN isn't working. I mean, it's become completely unfunctional because the great powers basically ignore it. And the United States, part of the nature of its rule-based international order is that it circumvents the UN. And Guterres, who was the UN Secretary General, was recently in Moscow, and the Russians, and that's Putin and Lavrov, both of whom met him, went out of their way when they met him to make that precise point. So yes, I mean, if you're going to discuss recreating a kind of concert of the world in place of concert of Europe, the UN would be the obvious format to do it. But at this moment in time, clearly it isn't really functioning in any effective way. That's absolutely true.
All right, from Fox Drake 360 $20 super chat. One has to realize the American government was seized by satanic elitist globalists who, with the CCP, want to destroy the USA. Average Americans like me find ourselves strangers in our own land. It was, if it ever was, never was.
Yes. So many Americans I know talk to me in that way, including Americans who, once upon a time thought of themselves as being politically on the left.
Thank you very much.
I mean, it's absolutely true.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that super chat. From Iris, $5 super chat. I love the Duran. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Iris, for that. Also from Iris, a super sticker, which says, game over. Game over, dude. Game over. All right. Thank you very much for that. Brian Boucher, $9.99. As always, thank you for the intelligent, insightful foreign policy analysis. I can't live without my daily dose of the Duran. Keep it up. You're doing God's work. Thank you very much for that. From Didapong, 1999. View on Blinken-Zelensky leak, not mentioned by Alexander, i.e. transfer assets from oligarchs to foreigners, land privatization, U.S. assets, favorite parties outside Ukraine, law, prosecution of all who helped Giuliani, etc.
We've done a whole program about this, actually. I mean, it's quite astonishing stuff because it's quite clear to me that the US government, the US political system, have now realized that they can't really achieve in Ukraine their geopolitical strategy, the one that they had when they when they encouraged the Maidan coup. I mean, this idea of using Ukraine as a launch pad to move into Russia, to get control of the pipelines, to get control of Sevastopol, that's all gone. And now that the Russians have said that they will fight if there's a war in the eastern Ukraine, it's absolutely off the table. So what do? What you do is you wring as much money out of the poor place as you possibly can. And we had this extraordinary visit by Nuland and Blinken going to Ukraine, meeting all these Ukrainian officials, Zelensky, Kubela, the prime minister, foreign minister, all of these sort of people, and telling them, you're going to give us all your assets. We're going to put our man in charge of NAFTA gas. You're going to do all of these things. Of course, it's all called reform. It's all called anti-corruption. But essentially, it's a shakedown. And it reminds me, as I've said so many times, so much of what used to happen in Russia in the mid-1990s, when people in the US began to realize that, the effort to refashion Russia wasn't working out. So they decided in the end to just go in and get out of it what they could. It's an astonishing situation. And I gather that Zelensky himself was stunned.
All right. Let's see. From Henry, €5 super chat. Anything about Finland? Alexander has told that he knows Finland well, and right now there's a lot going on. Love your show. Keeps me sane. Thanks.
It's a good point. Now, I used to know Finland very well because my brother used to live there for a long time, and I went there. I used to go to Finland. I love Helsinki, by the way. It's an extraordinarily beautiful city. Its interior, its central core, is like a kind of miniature St. Petersburg. And during the period of the Cold War, when people couldn't film in St. Petersburg, Western companies couldn't film in St. Petersburg, they often used to film in Helsinki instead. So it's extraordinarily beautiful country. Now, I'm not up to date with what is going on there. So if there is something specific on your mind, I'd be very interested to know what it is.
Sure.
My sense is that the Finns are becoming increasingly exasperated with these ideas that are coming out of Europe for slush funds and integration and all that sort of thing. So I think there is that aspect of it. I think they're also becoming increasingly unhappy about the immigration policies the EU is trying to force upon them. And I think also they are becoming, again, more friendly towards the Russians. But I have to say straightforwardly, that there's a lot going on in Finland at the moment, which I don't know, and I'm not up to speed with Finnish domestic politics.
All right, shoot us over an email, Henry, and send us some links, and we'll do a show on it. From Stan, $10 super chat. Carter entered the Rose Garden after a couple of years of the Iranian hostage crisis. Biden never came out of the basement. Don't worry about the military-industrial neocons. The U.S. is soft. That's a great comment. Thank you very much, Stan, for that. Brilliant. From Dan Noya, $10 super chat. No mention of CCP. I was going to go CCP troops in Canada under PM Castro.
That's brilliant. Brilliant.
God, he looks like, he really does look like Castro. Could we be looking at a second Cuban Missile Crisis, this time Taiwan for Canada instead of Cuba for Turkey?
It's an interesting idea. I wonder. I mean,
it is an interesting super chat.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't quite imagine it, but the world is in flux, as they say, and certainly the Canada that I used to know. I've never been there, by the way. My mother used to go very regularly and loved the country, but the Canada I remembered from the past is so different from the Canada of today that I can easily imagine the kind of change that you can see. I mean, the Canada of Lester Pearson, and it's just gone as far as I can see.
It's the Canada of Trudeau, of the younger Castro. From Joby Dodger, let's see, £5 super chat. Yo, at Duran. Deagle.com projected world population 2025 looking interesting. I doubt the plebes will be part of the 500 million up the bubbles.
Yeah,
but that's the 500 million is the benchmark for the population, I guess.
I presume so.
That's not good.
No,
for a lot of us. No. Bill Gates will be fine. From Mark Hewitt, £5 super chat. Is the plan for a UK carrier force to be based in Darwin?
Well, again, I mean, things are changing so much. I could just about see it, but perhaps not at once, not now. I don't know. I mean, British-Australian connections are very, very close, and perhaps one day we'll see that too. Who's to say?
All right, let's see. Got another super chat from Mark. Same question. All right, thank you very much, Mark, for those super chats. We appreciate it. From Jebs Magic Turtle. Any chance you guys would have a live on Saturday or Sunday sometime? Would love to call in, but I'm always at work on Fridays.
Well, we'll consider it. We'll consider it. Yeah.
We'll see if we can swing that.
Yeah.
In let's see, CHF Zariel, in much appreciation to the Duran and Spartan Warrior Queen for their time and work. Support them in any way you can. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you, Zariel. Have a great weekend. From Hickory Dickory, $10 super chat. Why do we need the Ukraine pipeline anyway? We have our own plentiful fuel sources at home, which they stupidly keep hindering or shutting down.
Well, we don't need the Ukraine pipeline. The idea was to block the Russians using the Ukraine pipeline. I mean, that was what that was all about. Ultimately, it was more about the Russians hurting the Russians than benefiting us. Of course, it hasn't worked out that way. In the end, all that happened was that the Russians diverted their gas in all kinds of ways, and they're moving away from Ukraine, and Russian exports to Europe are continuing in exactly the same way as before. They're increasing even. And the most bizarre thing of all is that the Russians, of course, are now exporting oil to the United States, because, of course, the United States isn't importing oil from Venezuela as it used to, and it's got any problems in its energy sector domestically. So really bizarre things happening in that respect.
All right. Let's see, where am I here? From Better Backwards, whatever happened to the Russian aircraft carriers under contract from the French?
Oh, right, they were. Yeah, it's an interesting story. The French cancelled the export of them. The Mistral They were helicopter carriers for amphibious warfare. So they cancelled. They refused to carry through with the sale. They then paid the Russians compensation and sold the 2 carriers to Egypt. So Egypt has them. And the Russians got some compensation. They learned an awful lot of know-how, and they're now building their own helicopter carriers. And to really pour the salt on the wounds, they're building them in Crimea, and they're apparently going to be much bigger than the French carriers that they were going to buy. So the 2 French carriers were going to be 25,000 tons full weight, and the Russian ones are going to be 40,000 tons full weight, which would put them on the same scale as the US Tarawa carriers that are used for the same purpose. But that's the story of that one. So the Russians got the know-how and the technology, even if they didn't get the carriers.
Right. From RK, who are the elites at the very top?
That's a very, very good question. I mean, it's a strange mix of people, if I may say. I mean, a lot of them, there's inherited wealth still plays a role, unquestionably. But a lot of these people who make up the ideologies, the elites, if you like, come from the world of finance, business. Finance plays a big role. High tech, military people, the military industrial complex. I've heard the number is put at about 5,000 to 10,000.
All right. From We Karen, thanks lads, €5 super chat. Thank you very much for that. From Asavet MD, we have been in a reverse Cuban Missile Crisis for 6 years. When I made my first trip to Russia in 2016, we went because of that very reason.
That's so true. That is so completely true.
Thank you for that super chat and for that comment as well. From Simon Ennifer, how he knew Castro was the communist Lloyd George. Trudeau, Castro was my father. The communist Lloyd George.
Well, I'm not quite sure I follow that one, but still, but the connection with Trudeau and Castro is, shall we say, widely commented on. I'm not sure how well established it is, but there is a resemblance, definitely.
There's a crazy resemblance. I have to admit it. There really is a crazy. I'm not. Once again, I'm not saying anything. No. Just my opinion. Yeah. Crazy resemblance. All right. Well, I think we got all the super chats. We'll leave it there. We'll leave it with Trudeau. Castro. Strange way to end the show on Biden.
We live in very strange times, and I think it's entirely suitable on a program like this to discussing these topics.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts, Alexander, as we wrap it up? And let me just do one quick check of the super chats. Make sure I got all of them.
I mean, I think this is the moment. This is the great thing that's happening in the world. I mean, we're seeing accelerating crisis in the United States, as I said, at a speed that I've never could have imagined, and we're seeing a drift, which I wonder whether it will turn into a helter-skelter retreat, or whether it will turn into a massive reaction, and a very dangerous one. But this is a very, very dangerous thing that we're seeing at the moment. So we shouldn't underestimate that. But anyway, it'll be interesting to watch as it happens. I can certainly see all kinds of very strange things happening over the next few probably weeks rather than months, actually.
The way things are going, yeah. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Spartan Warrior Queen, once again. Great moderation. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone that called in. Great conversations. To everyone that sent us a super chat, thank you very, very much. Great comments and questions in the super chat. To everyone that's donated to us as well via PayPal, via our donor box, everyone that's joined our locals community, Super U, Odysee, BitChute, Rumble. Thank you to everyone that is following us and tuning in, and to everyone here on YouTube as well. Thank you, guys, for another great Friday. Take care.